Hey guys, tonight we're stepping onto a soot-stained platform in the 1850s, where the shriek of a steam whistle cuts through pre-dawn darkness, and the entire rhythm of a town pulses to the iron heartbeat of the railway. You're about to spend 24 hours in a place where coal smoke tastes like progress, where a pocket watch can mean the difference between employment and starvation, and where the arrival of the 3 o'clock express is quite literally the most exciting thing that will happen all week. Fair warning, you probably won't survive the refreshment room's pork pie, but will cross that bridge when the lunch whistle blows. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing the global bedtime crew roll in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 4:47 in the morning, and you're jolting awake to a sound that's become the town's unholy rooster, the station master's brass whistle, shrill enough to wake the dead in the churchyard 2 streets over. Your room sits above a butcher's shop, close enough to the railway station that you can feel the vibrations through your bed frame when a heavy freight rumbles past. In the darkness, you fumble for the candle on your nightstand, and through your frost-etched window, you catch the first orange glow from the station's coal bunker, where the fireman is already at work. You dress quickly. The October chill doesn't negotiate pulling on yesterday's shirt because, let's be honest, you're going to be covered in coal dust within the hour anyway. The streets are still dark as you navigate by memory and the occasional gas lamp, passing the shuttered storefronts that will spring to life once the first trains deliver the day's commerce. A cat skitters across your path, probably heading home from whatever feline business occupies Victorian cats at this ungodly hour. The station reveals itself gradually through the gloom. First the massive clock face, its hands barely visible at 4:53, then the covered platform stretching into darkness like the ribcage of some industrial beast. By the 1850s, Britain had already laid over 6,000 miles of track, a nervous system of iron connecting every corner of the kingdom. You're living in one of the hundreds of towns that sprouted or exploded around these vital junctions, places that went from sleepy market villages to throbbing commercial hubs basically overnight. The smell hits you before anything else. Coal smoke, yes, but also grease, wet metal, and that peculiar scent of steam condensing on cold iron that you can practically taste. The station's boiler house is in full roar now, and through its open doors, you glimpse the fireman, a wiry man named Tom who you've seen shoveling coal with the methodical rhythm of a human metronome for 3 years running. His face glows orange in the furnace light, and he's already stripped to his shirt sleeves despite the cold, sweat-cutting clean lines through the coal dust on his face. Early again, he grunts, not looking up from his work. Tom claims he hasn't needed an alarm clock since 1852, says his body just knows when it's time to wake the iron horses. You're skeptical, but you've never seen him late. The first engine sits in the roundhouse, and you can hear it before you see it, the gentle hiss and occasional clank of a steam locomotive coming to life. Engineers debate endlessly whether the early morning warm-up should take 30 minutes or 4 to 5 historians still argue whether this obsessive precision improved safety or just gave railway workers something to be neurotic about. Either way, driver Bennett isn't taking chances. He's been circling his engine for 20 minutes, oil can in hand, lubricating every joint and bearing with the tenderness of a mother tucking in a child. You step onto platform 1 just as the station's gas lamps hiss to full brightness, and the massive space transforms from cave to cathedral. The arched iron roof, a miracle of Victorian engineering that still leaks when it rains, seems to float above you, its glass panels just beginning to catch the first hints of dawn. Sparrows are already chirping in the rafters, probably the same descendants of the birds that moved in the day the roof went up. They've adapted nicely to railway life, thank you very much, and they have no intention of leaving their rent-free accommodations. The platform is yours alone for now, and you take a moment to appreciate the eerie beauty of it, the perfectly swept brickwork, the painted waiting room doors in their company colors, the advertisement boards promising miraculous cures and exotic destinations. One poster catches your eye: Blackpool by the sea, 4 shillings return. And you make a mental note to ask about days off sometime in the next decade. Behind you, you hear the crunch of boots on gravel. The station master has arrived, and he's already consulting his pocket watch, cross-referencing it with the platform clock, probably cursing both for the half-second discrepancy he's detected. The man runs on railway time, which since 1847 has been standardized across the entire country. Before that, every town kept its own local time, which made scheduling trains somewhere between difficult and hallucinogenic. Now everyone in Britain sets their clocks to Greenwich, whether they like it or not. A quirky legend claims that one elderly farmer in Cornwall continued using God's time until 1873, refusing to acknowledge railway standardization, and missed his daughter's wedding by 4 to 7 minutes. True, probably not. Funny, absolutely. The sky is turning from black to deep blue now, and you can make out the signal posts in the distance, their arms still horizontal against the dawn. In 90 minutes, the first passenger train will arrive, and this platform will transform from peaceful temple to barely controlled chaos. But for now, it's just you, Tom's coal shovel finding its rhythm, and the gentle breathing of warming locomotives. The station master, Mr. Cornelius Webb, though everyone calls him the Colonel, despite never having served a day in the military, strides past you with the bearing of a man who believes the entire industrial revolution depends on his personal vigilance. He might not be entirely wrong. His uniform is immaculate, dark blue coat with brass buttons polished to mirror brightness, peaked cap sitting at a precise angle, and a watch chain thick enough to tow a carriage. That watch isn't just jewelry. It's his Bible, his compass, and quite possibly his most valued relationship. Platform 2 wants sweeping, he announces to no one in particular, though you know he's talking to you. Can't have the 47 passengers thinking we run a coal yard. You resist pointing out that you literally do run a coal yard. It's 50 yards that way, and grab the long-handled broom from the equipment shed. The Colonel has already moved on, his inspection route as predictable as the trains themselves. He'll check the signal box first, then the ticket office locks, then the waiting rooms, then he'll stand at the exact center of Platform 1 and visually confirm that the clock faces are synchronized. The man's either the most dedicated employee in Victorian England or desperately needs a hobby, possibly both. Following at a respectful distance, you watch him test the signal box door locked, as it has been every morning since the railway opened, then peer through the window at the silent levers within. The signal box won't staff up for another 30 minutes, when young Arthur arrives to begin his 12-hour shift of pulling levers and trying not to cause any horrific accidents. It's a job that's 99% boredom and 1% sheer terror, though Arthur claims the terror keeps you sharp. The Colonel produces a small leather notebook from his coat pocket and makes a mark. Everything goes in the book. Everything. Last month, you saw him note that a pigeon had defecated on Platform 3 at 2:17 p.m. You're not sure what he does with this information, but somewhere in his office is probably a filing cabinet full of pigeon-related incident reports. By 1850s standards, this station is a marvel of modern efficiency. It can handle 12 passenger services and countless freight movements daily without anyone dying, which honestly wasn't a guarantee in the railway industry's early days. Historians still argue whether the obsessive precision culture of railway management prevented accidents or simply gave everyone stress-related digestive problems. The Colonel represents the former school of thought, and his digestion can fend for itself. You're sweeping coal dust into neat piles when the Colonel pauses at the platform edge, staring down at the tracks with the intensity of a mystic reading tea leaves. He's counting the gap between rails. You realize, checking, that overnight frost hasn't caused any dangerous expansion in the iron. Railway companies learned this lesson the hard way after the winter of 1845, when contracting metals caused 11 separate derailments across the Midlands. Acceptable, he mutters, making another note. The ticket office comes next, where he rattles the door handle 3 times, not twice, not 4, precisely 3 before nodding in satisfaction. Through the window, you can see the neat stacks of pre-printed tickets, each one a tiny miracle of Victorian bureaucracy. There are tickets for first class, second class, third class, season tickets, workman's tickets, parliamentary tickets, a quirky requirement mandating one cheap daily service for the poor, and probably tickets for passengers who want to travel backwards while whistling hymns. The clerk who manages this system deserves a medal or possibly a sanitarium. Clock synchronization, the colonel announces, pulling out his watch with the ceremonial gravity of a priest unveiling a relic. You trail him to the center of Platform 1, where he stands absolutely motionless, watch in one hand, eyes fixed on the station's main clock. At precisely 5:15:00, both timepieces agree, and the colonel's shoulders drop half an inch in relief. This ritual happens 4 times daily, and you've never seen the clocks disagree by more than 3 seconds. Part of you wonders what he'd do if they ever drifted seriously out of sync, probably throw himself on the tracks in despair. Time is religion in railway towns. Before the companies standardized everything to Greenwich Mean Time, scheduling was a nightmare. Bristol ran 10 minutes behind London. Plymouth was 14 minutes slow. Liverpool did its own thing entirely. Can you imagine coordinating a network of connecting services when every town is operating in its own personal time zone? The miracle isn't that the railways succeeded, it's that anyone thought they could work in the first place. The waiting rooms receive their inspection next. First-class plush seats, a fireplace, an air that smells like lavender and entitlement. Second-class decent benches and fewer delusions of grandeur. And third-class basically a shed with a roof, where you're grateful to be out of the rain. The colonel checks each fireplace, each gas lamp, each piece of furniture for any sign of disorder. In first class, he adjusts a painting that's tilted approximately 1 degree from vertical. The painting depicts a locomotive crossing a viaduct at sunset, because of course it does. You've finished sweeping Platform 2 when you notice the first subtle change in the atmosphere. The darkness is retreating. The sky beyond the station canopy has shifted from deep blue to that peculiar pre-dawn gray that makes everything look slightly unreal. In the distance, you hear a rooster finally getting around to its job, roughly 4 to 5 minutes after the railway whistle already announced the day. The colonel is inspecting the luggage cartwheels because apparently that's essential at 5:30 a.m. when driver Bennett emerges from the roundhouse giving a thumbs up. The first engine is ready, warmed, oiled, pressurized, and prepared to haul several tons of human ambition toward the next station down the line. Very good, the colonel says, checking his watch again. We're maintaining schedule, as if any alternative were acceptable. As if the Earth might stop rotating if the 6:47 departed at 6:48. You're fairly certain the colonel believes exactly that, and honestly, given how smoothly this station runs, maybe he's earned the right to his obsessive precision. The first porters are arriving now, lunch pails in hand, ready to begin their brutal ballet of lifting luggage and pretending rich people aren't insufferable. They arrive like a tide, materializing from the gray morning mist that clings to the streets beyond the station. First come the porters, 6 men in matching company waistcoats who have been doing this job long enough that they can estimate a trunk's weight by looking at it, and know which passengers will tip generously versus those who will hand over a halfpenny and expect gratitude. You recognize Big William, ironically the shortest of the group, already stretching his back in anticipation of the coming assault on his spine. "Morning," he grunts, stashing his lunch pail in the porter's closet. His breakfast, you happen to know, consists of bread and dripping, an apple that's seen better weeks, and possibly some cheese if his wife hasn't eaten it first. By Victorian standards, this makes him reasonably well-fed. Railway work pays better than agricultural labor, which is why men compete viciously for these positions, despite the fact that you're basically a professional pack mule. Behind the porters comes Albert Finch, the senior ticket clerk, a man so devoted to numerical precision that he once spent 3 hours tracking down a missing farthing in his accounts, and discovered it had fallen into his shoe. He's already muttering to himself about today's expected passenger counts, cross-referencing mental calculations with a small notebook he produces from his waistcoat. Albert treats tickets the way some men treat their children, with obsessive attention and mild disappointment when they don't behave as expected. The trackmen appear next, a separate species entirely. These are the men who walk the rails at dawn, checking for cracks, loose bolts, shifted ballast, or any of the 1,000 small failures that could send a locomotive cartwheeling into a ditch. They smell like creosote and damp earth, carry hammers and wrenches like medieval knights carried swords, and possess an almost supernatural ability to spot a quarter-inch gap in rail alignment from 50 paces. Their foreman, a grizzled Scotsman everyone calls Mac, his actual name, is something unpronounceable involving too many consonants, nods to the colonel, and receives a nod in return the entire extent of their daily communication. By the 1850s, Britain's railway companies employed over 250,000 workers, making them one of the nation's largest employers. This station alone keeps 37 people in regular wages, from the station master down to the boy who sweeps platforms for 6 pence a day and all the coal dust his lungs can hold. You watch a woman arrive, Mrs. Patterson, who runs the refreshment room with an iron fist and a gift for making tea that's somehow both too strong and too weak simultaneously. She's trailed by her daughter, a pale girl of maybe 16 who looks like she'd rather be literally anywhere else. Can't blame her. Working in a railway refreshment room in the 1850s means spending 12 hours serving travelers who are already furious about delays, overcharged for everything, and operating under the reasonable assumption that your pork pies might actually be lethal. A quirky bit of railway lore claims that refreshment room food was intentionally terrible to discourage passengers from lingering and potentially missing their connections. Whether this was deliberate sabotage or just Victorian culinary standards is lost to history, though anyone who's tried Mrs. Patterson's mutton sandwich knows which theory they'd support. The morning mist is burning off now, and you can see all the way down the main street, where more workers emerge from terraced houses that didn't exist 15 years ago. This entire neighborhood sprouted because of the railway workers needed housing, workers needed shops, shops needed workers, and suddenly you've got a whole district of brick houses, public houses, a Methodist chapel, and 3 competing butchers all arguing about who has the freshest meat. The telegraph operator arrives on a bicycle, which is still novel enough that the colonel watches with mild disapproval, probably convinced that bicycles represent some dangerous erosion of traditional values. Never mind that the telegraph itself would have seemed like witchcraft to someone born 50 years earlier. The operator, a young man named Christopher who learned Morse code the way some people learn Latin, chains his bicycle to a lamp post and disappears into his domain. A small office filled with clicking instruments and tangled wires that connect this station to every other station in the network. Historians still argue whether the railway telegraph system or the trains themselves had a greater impact on Victorian society. The trains moved bodies, the telegraph moved information at literally the speed of electricity. Together, they collapsed distance in a way that must have felt like living through magic. The cleaners arrive 3 women who will spend the next several hours attacking the waiting rooms with brushes, soap, and the quiet resentment of people who know their work will be undone by lunchtime. They're followed by the coal boys, teenagers who will spend their day shoveling fuel, getting filthy, and probably developing respiratory problems that Victorian medicine has absolutely no idea how to treat. One of them is whistling something that might be a music hall tune or might just be random notes. It's hard to tell. You notice young Arthur sprinting toward the signal box, nearly late, his coat flapping behind him like a cape. He's got maybe 90 seconds before his shift officially begins, and the colonel is definitely watching. Arthur makes it with perhaps 15 seconds to spare, bursting into the signal box and probably collapsing against the wall in relief. The station is humming now, not with locomotives yet, but with human activity. Conversations echo under the iron roof. Complaints about wives, discussions of yesterday's cricket match, someone's theory about why the Prime Minister is an idiot, political opinions, same as they ever were. The gas lamps seem dimmer as natural light begins filtering through the glass roof panels, and those sparrows in the rafters are conducting what sounds like a full parliamentary debate about something vitally important to sparrow civilization. Big William is organizing his fellow porters into strategic positions along platform one. They know from experience exactly where different classes of passengers will cluster when the 6:47 arrives. First-class passengers congregate near the covered section, obviously. Third-class passengers bunch wherever there's space, grateful to have tickets at all. The colonel has completed his rounds and taken up his command position near the platform clock, watch in hand, eyes on the eastern track where the first train will appear. His entire body radiates preparedness, like a general awaiting battle. And you're leaning on your broom, watching the sunrise paint the station in shades of amber and rose, thinking that despite the cold dust and the early wake-up and Mrs. Patterson's horrifying refreshments, there's something magnificent about being part of this precise humming machine. The day shift has arrived. The railway awakens. At 6:42, you feel it before you hear it, a subtle vibration through the platform bricks, transmitted along miles of iron track like a telegraph message written in tremors. The colonel's head snaps toward the eastern approach, his entire body going still in that way hunting dogs do when they catch a scent. Big William and his porter crew shuffle into formation, adjusting their caps and rolling their shoulders. Mrs. Patterson has positioned herself in the refreshment room doorway, ready to ambush the desperate and hungry. Even the sparrows go quiet, as if they've learned that loud noises during train arrivals just make the whole experience more stressful for everyone involved. The vibration intensifies. You can hear it now, a distant rhythmic chuffing that grows louder with each passing second, accompanied by the metallic singing of wheels on rails. Christopher, the telegraph operator, has wandered out of his office to watch, because even people who spend all day around railway technology apparently never get tired of seeing trains arrive. It's like living next to the ocean and still finding waves impressive. At 6:44, the signal drops with a decisive clank that echoes across the platform. Young Arthur, invisible in his signal box, has done his job. The track is clear, the points are set, and the 6:47 has permission to enter the station. The colonel checks his watch, nods in satisfaction. Of course, the train is running on time. Would the universe dare suggest otherwise? And adjusts his cap. Then you see it. Smoke first, a dark plume rising above the morning mist, followed by the gleaming brass dome of the locomotive's chimney. The 6:47 is a mixed-traffic engine, not one of the fancy express locomotives that get all the attention in railway magazines, but a workhorse designed to haul passengers and freight with equal indifference to both. Its green paint is dulled by coal dust and road grime. Its brass fittings could use polishing, and there's a dent in one of its side tanks that driver Bennett claims gives it character. The engine rounds the final curve, and suddenly it's there. Tons of iron and steam bearing down on platform 1 with the inevitability of dawn. The noise is magnificent, a symphony of mechanical violence that includes the roar of the firebox, the hiss of escaping steam, the screech of brakes being applied, and the rumble of coupled wheels that you feel in your teeth. If someone had told your great-grandfather that humans would one day build machines that could pull 30 tons at 40 miles per hour, he'd have assumed you were describing dragon warfare. The locomotive slows smoothly, professionally, and driver Bennett brings it to a halt with the buffer stops exactly where the colonel expects them to be. A quirky superstition among railway staff claims that if a driver overshoots his mark, it brings bad luck for the entire day, though this is probably just something the colonel invented to keep everyone paranoid about precision. Steam billows across the platform in thick white clouds that smell like hot metal and coal smoke, and for a moment, you can't see anything except ghostly silhouettes moving in the fog. Then it clears, and the platform erupts into controlled chaos. The carriage doors fly open, or rather, they're wrestled open by passengers who have been awake since 5 a.m. and are not interested in waiting for permission, and humanity spills onto the platform like water from a broken dam. First-class passengers emerge first, naturally, because social hierarchy apparently extends to alighting from trains. They're merchants, lawyers, minor gentry, people whose morning commute involves reading newspapers in upholstered seats while someone else burns coal on their behalf. Big William and his crew descend like a well-rehearsed theater company. Trunks are seized, hat boxes are carefully balanced, carpet bags are hoisted onto trolleys with practiced efficiency. A particularly demanding lady in a purple dress is explaining at great length that her luggage contains fragile items and must be treated accordingly, while Big William makes the exact facial expression of a man who's heard this speech approximately 4,000 times and has learned to nod while thinking about lunch. Second-class passengers emerge next, looking tired but respectable clerks, shopkeepers, skilled tradesmen, the sort of people who can afford railway travel but not the fantasy of superiority that comes with first-class tickets. They carry their own bags mostly, nodding thanks when porters assist but not expecting it as divine right. Third-class passengers tumble out last, cramped from wooden benches and grateful to stretch. By the 1850s, railway companies were legally required to operate at least one cheap, parliamentary train daily, charging no more than a penny per mile, which meant working-class people could actually afford occasional travel. Historians still argue whether this democratized mobility or just gave employers new ways to exploit distant labor markets, but try telling that to the factory worker who can now visit his mother in the next county twice a year instead of never. A businessman nearly collides with you, muttering about missed breakfasts and important meetings, his briefcase swinging like a weapon. A mother struggles with two small children who have apparently decided that platform manners are optional. A young couple holds hands and gazes adoringly at each other, probably heading somewhere romantic, definitely blocking foot traffic, absolutely oblivious to the porters trying to navigate around them. The locomotive sits there breathing, a living thing of iron and fire, while driver Bennett and his firemen perform post-arrival rituals, checking bearings, topping up water, shoveling more coal into the insatiable furnace. Steam drifts lazily from the safety valve, and the whole machine ticks and creaks as hot metal begins cooling. Mrs. Patterson has already snared 3 customers, herding them toward the refreshment room with promises of fresh tea and wholesome food, both claims that would struggle to survive legal scrutiny. Her daughter stands behind the counter looking like she's contemplating whether transportation to Australia might actually be preferable to another shift. The Colonel moves through the crowd like Moses through water, checking tickets, answering questions, maintaining order through sheer force of officious presence. Someone asks when the next London service departs. Someone else wants to know about connections to Manchester. A confused elderly gentleman is convinced this is Birmingham, and the Colonel gently redirects him while probably making a mental note about platform signage. You're sweeping away the coal dust and debris left by the train's arrival when you notice it's 6:49. 2 minutes to unload, 2 minutes for the platform to transform from empty stage to packed marketplace. In about 4 hours, this exact dance will repeat with the morning market train, then again with the midday express, then again and again, until the day's final passengers disappear into the darkness. The 6:47 hisses contentedly, already being prepared for its return journey. The railway never stops moving. The moment the passengers finish disembarking, they descend upon the platform like locusts with pocket money. You hadn't noticed the breakfast carts arriving. They have a supernatural ability to materialize exactly when needed, but suddenly, there are 4 of them clustered near the waiting room entrance, each operated by someone who's perfected the art of competitive food vending in the railway age. Old Tom, not to be confused with Tom, the fireman, runs the tea cart, a battered wooden contraption mounted on iron wheels with a copper urn that's probably older than the railway itself. Steam rises from the urn spout in lazy curls, and Tom dispenses tea into thick ceramic mugs with the speed of a man who knows his customers are racing against departure times. His tea is strong enough to strip paint, sweetened with enough sugar to send a modern dentist into cardiac arrest, and costs a penny for a mug that technically should be returned but rarely is. Tom has accepted mug theft as a business expense. Tea, hot tea, sweeten your morning. He bellows, his voice cutting through the platform noise like a church bell through Sunday silence. A businessman in a rumpled suit nearly tackles another passenger to reach the cart first, slapping down his penny and seizing the mug like it contains liquid salvation, which after a 5 a.m. departure from some rural station down the line, it probably does. Next to Tom's operation, Mrs. Wickham presides over the pie cart, and if you value your digestive system, you'll approach with extreme caution. Her meat pies are legendary, and not in a good way. The crusts are greasy, the filling is of mysterious provenance, meat and vegetables, covers a lot of theological ground, and the temperature ranges from scalding to somehow still frozen in the middle. A quirky railway legend claims that a passenger once bit into a Mrs. Wickham pie and discovered a complete mouse skeleton, but when confronted, she insisted it was just extra protein and refused to issue a refund. Pies fresh this morning. Mrs. Wickham shouts, which is technically true if you define fresh as made sometime in the recent past, and this morning as possibly yesterday morning. Despite this, she's doing brisk business. Railway travel makes people hungry, and hunger makes people make poor decisions. A third-class passenger, a young man in worn but clean clothing who looks like a factory worker, counts out his pennies carefully before purchasing both tea and a pie. You watch him bite into it, watch his face register surprise possibly at finding actual meat, then watch him devour the rest in 4 huge bites. When you're genuinely hungry, Mrs. Wickham's pies transform from questionable to adequate, which is basically her entire business model. The newspaper boy, a scrawny kid named Danny who can't be more than 12, weaves through the crowd with a leather satchel full of morning editions. Times, Chronicle, read about the latest from Parliament. He's got the thin, sharp features of someone who's been working since he could walk, and the aggressive sales technique of someone who knows that hesitation means losing customers to competitors. 2 men buy papers simultaneously, and Danny produces change from his pockets with the efficiency of a bank teller. By the 1850s, the railway had revolutionized newspaper distribution. Morning editions, printed in London, could reach provincial towns by breakfast time, creating a national conversation that would have been impossible a generation earlier. Historians still argue whether this democratized information or just allowed London-based publishers to dominate provincial markets, but either way, Danny's making a living from it. The 4th cart belongs to a woman selling fresh rolls, butter, and jam, and honestly, this is your best bet if you value your internal organs. Her rolls are actually fresh. You can smell the yeast and flour from 10 feet away, and her butter comes from a farm 2 miles outside town. She's charging 2pence for a buttered roll, which is steep, but quality costs, and several first-class passengers are forming an orderly queue rather than risking Mrs. Wickham's geological pie experiments. You navigate through this commercial chaos, trying to retrieve abandoned tea mugs before old Tom notices and starts muttering about thieves. A porter rushes past carrying an absurdly large trunk, nearly upending the newspaper boy, who responds with language that would shock his mother and probably violate several decency laws. The colonel appears from nowhere, gives the boy a warning look, and the profanity ceases immediately. The colonel's superpower isn't organization, it's the ability to suppress bad behavior through sheer disapproval. A woman in a green traveling dress is arguing with Mrs. Wickham about pie pricing, insisting that 4pence is highway robbery for something that looks like it lost a fight with a rolling pin. Mrs. Wickham responds that if Madam doesn't appreciate quality pastry, perhaps Madam should bring her own provisions. The argument continues with increasing volume, while other customers simply reach around them to conduct transactions, because railway platforms teach you to work around obstacles or miss your train. Mrs. Patterson has emerged from the refreshment room, probably drawn by the smell of competing food vendors, and she's glaring at the breakfast carts with the intensity of someone watching rival generals invade her territory. There's an ongoing Cold War between the refreshment room, which has official railway approval and actual seating, and the platform vendors, who have mobility, lower prices, and food that won't haunt your nightmares. Mrs. Patterson clearly considers the carts beneath contempt while simultaneously being furious about their success. A middle-aged clerk purchases tea from Old Tom, 2 pies from Mrs. Wickham Brave Man, and a newspaper from Danny, then attempts to juggle all 3 while checking his pocket watch. This goes about as well as you'd expect. The newspaper unfolds into his face, 1 pie attempts escape, and the tea sloshes dangerously close to his coat. He performs an impressive recovery that deserves applause, then retreats to a bench to consume his purchases before the next train departs. The breakfast rush lasts maybe 15 minutes, a concentrated explosion of commercial activity that leaves the vendors counting coins, the passengers fed using the term loosely, and the platform littered with abandoned mugs, pie wrappings, and newspaper pages fluttering in the coal-scented breeze. You're collecting debris when you hear the colonel's whistle. The 647 is preparing to depart on its return journey, and any stragglers need to board immediately or explain to their employers why they're late. The carts begin their retreat, vendors counting their morning's take, already thinking about the next arrival and the next wave of desperate, hungry travelers. The breakfast vendors have barely cleared the platform when you hear a new sound, the metallic screech of the mail van's door being wrestled open, followed by the unmistakable thud of heavy sacks hitting the platform. The Royal Mail doesn't care about your digestion, or whether you've finished your questionable pie parcels wait for no man, and the Postal Service runs on schedules that make the Colonel look relaxed by comparison. You hurry toward the mail van, where the postal clerk, a perpetually harried man named Mr. Sutton, who treats lost letters like personal betrayals, is already knee-deep in canvas sacks, each one stuffed with correspondence, parcels, newspapers, and occasionally things that probably shouldn't be sent via post but are anyway. His spectacles sit crooked on his nose, his collar is already loosened despite the morning chill, and he's muttering what sounds like a prayer but is probably just creative profanity disguised as religious contemplation. "Grab that one," he orders, pointing to a particularly bulbous sack that's testing the structural integrity of its stitching. You heave it onto your shoulder. It weighs approximately as much as a small horse and stagger toward the sorting area, a covered section of platform that smells like canvas, ink, and the desperate hopes of people waiting for news from distant relatives. By the 1850s, the railway had completely revolutionized the postal service. Before trains, mail traveled by horse-drawn coach at maybe 8 miles per hour, assuming the horses were feeling cooperative and the roads weren't ankle-deep in mud. Now, letters could travel from London to Edinburgh in under 12 hours, creating what Victorians genuinely considered to be witchcraft-adjacent miracle technology. The penny post, introduced in 1840, meant ordinary people could afford to send letters, and the railway made sure those letters actually arrived before the sender died of old age. Mr. Sutton has spread his manifest across a wooden table, and he's cross-referencing the listed parcels with what's actually emerged from the van, a process that seems to be causing him physical pain. "Illegible handwriting," he announces to the universe. "How is this a P? It looks like a deformed spider died on the page." You empty your sack onto the sorting table, and parcels tumble out in a cascade of brown paper, twine, and hopeful labeling. There are hat boxes from London milliners, tool orders for local workshops, medicine bottles wrapped in enough padding to survive a small war, books, fabric samples, mysterious packages marked fragile that have clearly been treated like rugby balls, and one parcel that's leaking something that smells disturbingly organic. What in God's name? Mr. Sutton picks up the leaking parcel with 2 fingers, holding it away from his body like it might explode. The label reads cheese handle with care in optimistic handwriting. It's been handled with care, all right. Someone's cared enough to crush it into liquid form. A quirky Victorian postal regulation actually prohibited sending noxious or offensive materials via mail, but enforcement was spotty at best, leading to legendary incidents of exploding preserves, putrefying game birds, and one infamous case where someone allegedly mailed a live turtle. The turtle survived. The postal clerk's sanity did not. Big William appears to help with the larger freight, and together you begin unloading the serious cargo, crates of manufactured goods heading to local shops, coal samples for the town's iron foundry, machine parts wrapped in old cloth, and an entire barrel marked glassware this side up that's currently on its side. William carefully writes it while making the sign of the cross, though whether he's Catholic or just hedging his bets isn't clear. The platform is transforming into a commercial distribution center. Parcels are sorted by destination, local delivery, onward rail connection, or collection by recipients who have been notified by yesterday's mail that they have incoming packages. Mr. Sutton works with the focused intensity of a man who knows that one misfiled letter could end up delaying someone's wedding invitation, business contract, or news of a relative's death, and all three carry equal weight in the postal service's moral universe. You help sort the local deliveries, reading labels and trying to decipher Victorian handwriting, which apparently didn't include penmanship as a mandatory skill. Some addresses are clear. Mr. J. Thompson, 14 Station Road, is straightforward. Others are creative interpretations of geography. The house with the blue door near the butcher's, the one, requires local knowledge and possibly divine intervention. A pile of newspapers, yesterday's London editions, which will be sold locally for a penny each, gets stacked near the waiting room. The railway turned newspapers into a daily rather than weekly phenomenon in provincial towns, creating a population that could follow ongoing news stories rather than getting one fragmented update per week and trying to fill in the blanks. Historians still argue whether this improved civic engagement or just gave people more things to argue about at the pub, though those outcomes aren't mutually exclusive. Mr. Sutton is now wrestling with a parcel wrapped so extensively in twine that it resembles a spider's web made of string. "Why?" he asks the absent sender. "Why this much twine? Are you packaging a letter or preparing for siege warfare?" You notice the colonel observing from a distance, pocket watch in hand, because even mail sorting operates on railway time. The mail van needs to be emptied, sorted, and ready for departure within 28 minutes. That's the allocated window, and Mr. Sutton knows it. Despite his muttering, his hands move with practiced efficiency, sorting and stacking with barely a glance at labels. A woman arrives to collect a parcel. She's clearly been waiting for it, probably checking the station daily like someone checking the horizon for returning ships. Mr. Sutton consults his list, locates her package in the sorted pile, and hands it over with a smile that briefly transforms him from harried clerk to public servant, genuinely pleased to reunite people with their mail. She clutches the package like it contains treasure, thanks him profusely, and hurries off. The pile diminishes. Local deliveries are loaded onto a handcart for the delivery boy, who'll spend the next 3 hours trudging through town knocking on doors. Onward connections are repacked into sacks marked with destination stations. Damaged items like the liquefied cheese are set aside for investigation and probably insurance claims. By the time the mail van is empty, Mr. Sutton's jacket is off, his sleeves are rolled up, and he looks like he's aged 5 years. "Same time tomorrow," he says grimly, as if this is a threat rather than a schedule. The colonel checks his watch and nods. 26 minutes. Acceptable efficiency. The mail van's door slams shut, and another small miracle of Victorian logistics concludes successfully. The platform exhales. It's 7:34, and for the first time since the pre-dawn chaos began, the station settles into something resembling peace. The breakfast vendors have retreated to wherever breakfast vendors go between trains, probably counting coins and questioning their life choices. The mail is sorted. The passengers from the 647 have dispersed into the town like ripples from a stone dropped in a pond. Even the sparrows in the rafters seem to have declared a temporary ceasefire in their ongoing territorial disputes. You lean on your broom and actually notice the silence, or what passes for silence in a railway station. There's still the distant hiss of locomotives in the engine shed, the occasional clank of tools from the workshop, the murmur of conversation from the ticket office, where Albert Finch is probably reconciling receipts with the obsessive focus of an accountant hunting a rogue farthing. But compared to the controlled pandemonium of train arrival, this feels like standing in a cathedral after the congregation has left. The colonel has retreated to his office, a small kingdom of filing cabinets, ledgers, and probably a secret shrine to railway punctuality, leaving the platform in the capable hands of Big William and the remaining porters. They're taking advantage of the lull to reorganize luggage trolleys, coil ropes that have mysteriously uncoiled themselves, and engage in the ancient working-class tradition of complaining about management while secretly appreciating the break. This is when Mac and his trackmen emerge from whatever parallel dimension they inhabit between inspections. Mac carries a toolbox that's probably older than Queen Victoria, and his crew spreads out along the platforms with the purposeful stride of men who take railway safety very seriously because they've seen what happens when people don't. Historians still argue whether the early railway industry's safety culture developed from genuine concern for human life or from the expensive inconvenience of accidents, but Mac doesn't care about motivation, he just cares about finding problems before problems find passengers. You watch him kneel beside the track, running his fingers along the rail joint like a doctor checking for a pulse. Railway rails in the 1850s aren't the continuous welded strips of modern engineering, they're individual lengths of iron bolted together at joints, and those joints are where trouble lives. Thermal expansion can open gaps, vibration can loosen bolts, and metal fatigue can cause cracks that turn routine journeys into newspaper headlines. "Och, ye wee bastard," Mac mutters, though whether he's addressing a loose bolt or the universe in general remains unclear. He produces a wrench and tightens something with practiced efficiency, then moves to the next joint, then the next, working his way down the platform with metronomic patience. One of his crew, a younger man whose name you think is Peter but might be Paul, is checking the wooden sleepers that support the rails, tapping each one with a small hammer and listening to the sound it makes. Solid wood produces a sharp, clean tone. Rotten wood produces a dull thud that means replacement is overdue. It's like a musical instrument made of infrastructure, and Peter or Paul plays it with the concentration of a concert violinist. The ballast, those crushed stones between and around the sleepers, receives its own inspection. Properly maintained ballast provides drainage, distributes weight, and prevents track movement. Neglected ballast turns into mud pits that swallow rails like quicksand. One trackman is shoveling fresh stones into a low spot, another is raking the surface smooth, and a third is just staring at a section with the troubled expression of someone who sees problems invisible to civilian eyes. A quirky engineering debate of the Victorian era centered on optimal ballast material, limestone, granite, or slag from iron foundries. Each had passionate advocates who wrote lengthy treatises defending their preferred rock like theologians debating scripture. The railway companies mostly just used whatever was cheapest and locally available, which is how most engineering debates actually get resolved. You turn your attention to your own maintenance duties, which currently involve attacking the platform with your broom like you're personally offended by coal dust. And honestly, you are. The stuff regenerates faster than you can sweep it, appearing from nowhere in a conspiracy between physics and Victorian industry. You sweep it into piles, shovel the piles into bins, carry the bins to the ash yard, and tomorrow it'll be back like nothing happened. Job security, you suppose. Mrs. Patterson's daughter, whose name, you've learned, is Annie, emerges from the refreshment room with a bucket and brush, tasked with scrubbing the waiting room floors during the lull. She looks about as enthusiastic as someone preparing for dental surgery, and you don't blame her. The first-class waiting room probably isn't too bad. Those passengers generally manage to avoid tracking mud everywhere, but third class is a disaster zone of footprints, spilled tea, and mysterious stains that might predate the railway's construction. The platform clock ticks toward 8 o'clock, and you're struck by how strange this all is. You're standing in a building that didn't exist 20 years ago, performing a job that didn't exist 30 years ago, in a town whose current size and prosperity depend entirely on the fact that railway engineers decided this spot was geometrically convenient for laying tracks. Your grandfather was a farmhand. Your father was a farmhand. You sweep coal dust at a railway station because history decided that iron and steam were more important than agriculture, and your entire life pivoted on that decision. By the 1850s, the railway had reordered British geography. Towns that happened to get stations boomed. Towns that didn't withered. Ancient market centers lost importance if they were bypassed by the rails, while random crossroads became thriving junctions simply because that's where the engineers put the tracks. You're living through a revolution, except instead of guillotines and manifestos, it's timetables and property values. Big William wanders over, wiping his hands on a rag. Quiet in it, he observes, which is the most profound philosophical statement you'll hear all morning. Next train's not till 9:15, you reply, consulting the timetable board that's posted near the waiting rooms. Market train from Ashford. He nods, already anticipating the chaos that particular service brings. Farmers with livestock crates, merchants with produce baskets, the smell of animals and vegetables competing for dominance in the Victorian olfactory Olympics. Best enjoy the peace while we got it. Mac walks past, toolbox in hand, apparently satisfied with his inspection. He catches your eye and gives a brief nod, high praise from a man who treats words like a limited natural resource. The station settles deeper into its lull, and you sweep, and Annie scrubs, and the trackmen maintain, and somewhere in his office, the colonel probably checks his watch against the platform clock for the 17,000th time today. At 9:12, you hear the familiar vibration, except this time it's accompanied by something new, the distant sound of livestock expressing their opinions about rail travel. The market train from Ashford is approaching, and it's bringing half the countryside with it: farmers, merchants, animals, produce, and the particular brand of chaos that happens when rural commerce collides with Victorian infrastructure. The colonel emerges from his office, pocket watch already in hand, though he looks less composed than usual. Market trains are unpredictable in ways that make him visibly uncomfortable. You can schedule the departure time, but you cannot schedule how long it takes to unload 3 sheep, 4 crates of chickens, and a pig that's decided platform life looks better than whatever fate awaits it in town. Big William and his crew position themselves with the resigned posture of soldiers preparing for battle. "Right, lads," William says, "remember last week's goose incident. Stay alert, keep your fingers clear, and if anything starts flying, duck." The train rounds the bend, and even from a distance, you can see it's absolutely heaving with cargo. Every freight van looks stuffed to bursting, and you're fairly certain you just saw a cow's head poking through one of the ventilation slats. The locomotive itself seems to be working harder than usual, smoke pouring from its chimney in thick black clouds that suggest the fireman is shoveling coal like his life depends on it. The train shudders to a halt, driver Bennett doing his best despite the unusual load, and before it's fully stopped, the cargo van doors are sliding open, and farmers are jumping out like they're storming a beach. These aren't your polite first-class passengers with their careful manners and reasonable expectations. These are men who have been awake since 4 a.m., traveled 15 miles to catch this train, and have produced to sell before it wilts or dies, whichever comes first. The first crate off contains chickens, and they're not happy about their journey. The farmer, a weather-beaten man in a coat that's seen better decades, hauls the crate onto the platform with a grunt, and immediately the air fills with agitated clucking. The chickens peer through the wooden slats with the beady judgment that only chickens can achieve, probably plotting revenge against the entire railway industry. Behind him, two younger men wrestle a pig down a ramp, and the pig is fighting them every step of the way. It's squealing at volumes that could wake the dead, digging its trotters into the wood, and generally making clear its opinion that railway travel is beneath its dignity. One farmer loses his grip, the pig lurches sideways, Big William lunges to block its escape, and somehow through what looks like accidental choreography, they manage to get it into a holding pen near the platform edge. A quirky bit of Victorian railway lore claims that pigs became such problematic passengers that some companies briefly considered banning them entirely, until farmers pointed out that pork was rather important to the national diet, and perhaps the railways should solve their livestock management issues instead of outlawing bacon. The pigs stayed. The problems did not improve. You dodge a farmer carrying two enormous baskets of potatoes, duck under another man's bundle of firewood, and nearly collide with a woman balancing what appears to be every egg in the county. The platform is transforming into an open-air market, except with more coal dust and the constant danger of getting trampled by agricultural commerce. Crates keep coming, turnips, cabbages, apples, the good ones and the slightly questionable but still technically edible ones, onions, carrots, and a truly alarming quantity of Brussels sprouts that someone apparently thinks the town needs. One crate is labeled Fragile Glass JARS and contains what looks like preserved fruits, though the preservation process appears to have involved ingredients that would concern modern food safety inspectors. The livestock situation is escalating. In addition to the chickens and the pig, you now have 3 sheep being led by a farmer who's discovered that sheep on platforms behave like sheep everywhere else. They panic, they run in random directions, and they have absolutely no survival instincts. One sheep makes a break for the tracks. The farmer lunges. Big William intercepts. The sheep, defeated, rejoins its companions while plotting its next escape attempt. By the 1850s, the railway had completely revolutionized agricultural commerce. Before trains, farmers could only sell to local markets. The time and cost of hauling produce by cart limited their radius to maybe 10 or 15 miles. Now they could reach urban markets 40 or 50 miles away, arriving with fresh goods before breakfast. This expanded their customer base, increased competition, and completely restructured rural economies. Historians still argue whether this primarily benefited farmers through better prices or urban merchants through cheaper supply, though the answer is probably both, depending on the specific commodity and local market conditions. The colonel is attempting to maintain order, but even his formidable presence can't fully control agricultural chaos. He's directing traffic, checking manifests, and visibly restraining himself from comments about efficiency when a farmer takes 4 minutes to unload a single crate because he won't stop chatting about weather conditions in his village. Mrs. Patterson has positioned herself strategically near the waiting room, probably hoping to sell tea to thirsty farmers, but most of them have brought their own provisions, bread, cheese, maybe some ale in earthenware bottles, because they know better than to trust railway refreshment room pricing. Annie appears with her bucket, sees the platform conditions, and wisely retreats back inside. This is not a floor-scrubbing situation. This is a wait until the livestock leaves and pray nobody tracks anything too organic into the waiting room's situation. A merchant arrives to collect his expected delivery of tools from Birmingham: hammers, saws, various metal implements wrapped in oiled cloth, and has to navigate through a forest of produced crates and one particularly aggressive chicken that's escaped its container and seems to have declared war on humanity. The chicken is winning. You're helping stack cabbages when you notice it's 9:47, 32 minutes to unload one train. The colonel is making notes in his little book, probably documenting this as evidence that market trains represent a clear and present danger to railway punctuality. The last crate comes off more potatoes, because apparently this town's potato needs are infinite, and the farmers begin dispersing into town, heading to market stalls where they'll sell their goods and probably complain about railway fees while secretly appreciating that they can now reach customers their grandfathers never could have accessed. The platform slowly empties, leaving behind cabbage leaves, chicken feathers, and the lingering smell of livestock mingled with coal smoke. The market train has delivered rural England to your doorstep, and now it's the sweeper's problem. The market chaos has barely subsided when you hear it through the open door of the telegraph office, a rapid staccato clicking that sounds like a deranged insect having a nervous breakdown. Christopher is at work, and from the speed of that clicking, something important is happening somewhere on the network. You drift closer, curious, because the telegraph office is normally off-limits to anyone who doesn't speak fluent Morse code or have the colonel's explicit permission. Christopher sits hunched over his instrument, one hand on the key, the other scribbling notes onto a message form with handwriting that's somehow both rushed and perfectly legible. His face carries the concentrated expression of someone translating between languages at high speed, which is essentially what he's doing, converting electrical pulses into English, English into electrical pulses, all while keeping track of which station he's talking to and what the previous 3 messages said. The clicking intensifies. Christopher's hand flies across the key. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, longer pause, tap, 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 tap. To you, it's meaningless noise. To him, it's a conversation with the station master at Millbrook, 12 miles down the line, who's reporting that the 10:15 service is running 8 minutes late due to a signal malfunction at Junction 4. Bloody hell, Christopher mutters, finishing his transcription. He tears the message form from its pad and practically throws it at a messenger boy who's been waiting by the door. Colonel needs this immediately. Go. The boy sprints off, and Christopher is already composing a response, his fingers dancing on the key with the practiced rhythm of a pianist. The telegraph clicks its reply. Message received. Will adjust platform expectations, standing by for updates. Somewhere 12 miles away, another operator is receiving those clicks and translating them back into words, completing a conversation that would have taken hours by messenger on horseback and now takes seconds via electricity and copper wire. By the 1850s, the railway telegraph system had become the nervous system of Victorian Britain. Over 10,000 miles of telegraph wire ran alongside the tracks, connecting every station in the network. Companies could coordinate train movements, report delays, warn about hazards, and generally prevent the kind of catastrophic scheduling disasters that happened when everyone was just guessing about where trains were. The railway and telegraph had evolved together, each technology making the other more effective, like a very specific and oddly romantic industrial partnership. You peer into the office Christopher notices but doesn't object, probably too busy to care and take in the organized chaos. The walls are covered with timetables, code books, and handwritten notes about special instructions. The main telegraph instrument sits on a desk that's covered in message forms, some completed, some waiting to be sent, all organized according to some system that makes sense only to Christopher. A second instrument sits nearby, currently silent, reserved for emergency communications. The main instrument clicks again. Christopher listens, actually listens, as if the clicking itself conveys meaning before he writes it down. Ashford to all stations, he announces, though you're the only person in earshot. Track inspection at mile marker 4 to 7. Expect delays on northbound services. He copies the message, logs it in his communications register because everything gets logged, always, forever, and begins transmitting it to the next station down the line. The telegraph network operates on a relay system. Messages get passed station to station until they reach their destination or everyone on the network knows about whatever's happening. It's efficient. It's revolutionary. It's also prone to errors when someone mistranscribes a number, and suddenly everyone thinks the delay is at mile marker 7 to 4 instead of 4 to 7. Historians still argue whether the telegraph's greatest impact was operational efficiency or safety improvements. Before the telegraph, trains ran on fixed timetables, and basically hoped they wouldn't encounter other trains in problematic locations. After the telegraph, station masters could actually communicate about where trains were and adjust accordingly. Accidents still happened. Victorian safety standards were what we might charitably call developing, but they happened less often. The clicking takes on a different rhythm, and Christopher's posture changes. "Oh, that's not good," he says quietly, writing faster. You lean in to see the message forming on the page. Engine 247 mechanical failure west of Langley. Blocking single track. Require replacement engine immediate. This is the kind of message that turns routine railway operations into strategic puzzles. Engine 247 isn't just broken, it's broken on a single track section, which means no other trains can pass until it's either fixed or removed. Christopher is already composing messages to multiple stations. Notify the replacement engine crew, warn incoming trains about delays, coordinate with the breakdown gang, inform the colonel who will definitely have opinions about this. His fingers blur across the telegraph key. The office fills with clicking outgoing messages, incoming acknowledgments, questions, confirmations, and probably a few messages from other stations asking if he knows anything about unrelated issues, because apparently everyone assumes the telegraph operator has omniscient awareness of the entire network. A quirky Victorian telegraph practice involved operators developing distinctive fists, personal sending styles as recognizable as handwriting. Experienced operators could identify who was sending a message just by the rhythm and timing of the clicks, leading to a strange kind of long-distance camaraderie between people who'd never actually met but recognized each other's electrical personalities. "Tell the colonel that 247's broken," you offer, trying to be helpful. "Already sent the messenger," Christopher replies without looking up. He knows. He's probably already decided whose fault this is and filed a formal complaint with God. The clicking continues. Updates flow in. The replacement engine is being prepared. Estimated departure in 18 minutes. The breakdown gang has been notified and is assembling their equipment. Incoming trains are being held at stations to prevent congestion. The entire network is adapting in real time to a single mechanical failure 12 miles away, and it's all being coordinated through electrical pulses and the exhausted telegraph operators who translate them. You watch Christopher work for another few minutes, marveling at the concentration required to maintain multiple simultaneous conversations via Morse code, while tracking everything in written logs and occasionally shouting updates to whoever's nearby. The man deserves a raise or possibly a medal or at minimum some tea that isn't from Mrs. Patterson's urn of despair. The emergency instrument suddenly clicks to life, a different, more urgent sound. Christopher's head snaps toward it. "That's the block system," he explains, though you didn't ask. "Confirms track sections are clear for train movements. If that's clicking, someone's moving something." He listens, translates silently, then relaxes. "Replacement engines departing. Should have 247 cleared within the hour. Crisis managed. Network adapted. Telegraph operators aged another year." The clicking settles back into routine rhythms. Schedule confirmations, routine updates, someone at a distant station apparently requesting information about lost luggage. You leave Christopher to his electrical conversations and step back onto the platform, where the analog world of coal and steam continues its business, blissfully unaware of the invisible web of copper wire and Morse code that keeps it all from descending into chaos. By 11 o'clock, the platform undergoes a transformation that would puzzle anyone who'd only witnessed the morning's agricultural chaos. The cabbage leaves have been swept away, the chicken feathers removed, and the coal dust temporarily suppressed through sheer force of will and vigorous sweeping. More importantly, the demographic has shifted entirely. The farmers and merchants have dispersed into town, the working-class commuters are long gone, and now the platform is filling with an entirely different species. middle-class ladies engaged in what Victorian society has somehow decided is a perfectly respectable leisure activity: railway visiting. You first notice Mrs. Hartwell, the draper's wife, arriving in a burgundy dress with enough fabric to upholster a sofa, accompanied by her daughter Constance, who looks like she'd rather be literally anywhere else. They're not catching a train. They're not meeting anyone arriving on a train. They're here because the railway station has become, improbably, the place to see and be seen in respectable society, like a drawing room that occasionally has locomotives passing through. Mrs. Hartwell positions herself on a bench with strategic sight lines to both the platform entrance and the refreshment room, adjusts her bonnet, and begins the complicated social calculus of determining who else might arrive and whether they're worth acknowledging. Constance sits beside her, already looking bored, probably contemplating whether social obligations are worth enduring or if becoming a hermit might offer better quality of life. They're followed by Mrs. Pemberton, the solicitor's wife, who's brought her friend Mrs. Davies for what they're calling a constitutional walk that happens to conclude at the station. Both women are dressed in their calling costumes, outfits specifically designed for making social visits, which in the Victorian middle-class universe is apparently a full-time occupation requiring specialized clothing. Mrs. Pemberton's dress is a blue-green that fashion magazines would probably call peacock or aquamarine or some other word that means expensive. "Oh, Mrs. Hartwell," Mrs. Pemberton exclaims, as if encountering her at the railway station is a delightful surprise rather than the obvious outcome of all of them following the same social script. What a pleasant coincidence. There's no coincidence involved. By the 1850s, railway stations in market towns had become de facto social clubs for middle-class women, particularly those whose domestic situations were comfortable enough to allow leisure time, but not wealthy enough to have private drawing rooms large enough for serious entertaining. The platform offered a public space where women could gather, gossip, observe, and engage in the delicate social negotiations that Victorian society considered essential to maintaining respectability. You're sweeping nearby because coal dust is eternal and you can't help overhearing their conversation, which starts with polite inquiries about health and family before rapidly evolving into something more interesting. "Have you heard about the Johnsons?" Mrs. Davies asks, lowering her voice to a volume that probably carries to the next county. "The Johnsons," Mrs. Hartwell lines in, clearly interested. "Apparently their daughter has been seen walking with that clerk from the counting house, unchaperoned." The scandal in Mrs. Davies' tone suggests this is only slightly less shocking than armed robbery. Constance rolls her eyes in a way that suggests she's heard this type of conversation roughly 10,000 times and is no longer capable of caring about other people's walking arrangements. A quirky aspect of Victorian railway station socializing was that it existed in a strange social gray area. It was public enough to be respectable, but informal enough to allow conversations that wouldn't happen in more formal visiting contexts. Historians still argue whether this represented genuine social freedom for middle-class women or just a different form of social constraint that required them to perform leisure activities in semi-public spaces rather than privately. More ladies arrive, Miss Fletcher and her sister, both unmarried women in their 30s who supplement their modest income by teaching piano, accompanied by their former pupil, a young girl who's clearly been dragged along as social training. They join the growing cluster on and around the benches, and suddenly the platform resembles a garden party that's somehow gotten lost and ended up near a railway track. The conversation flows from scandal to fashion. Have you seen the new bonnet styles in the ladies' magazine? To complaints about servants, my cook insists she needs more coal for the range, but I suspect she's selling it. To speculation about who might be traveling through today, I heard the rector is expecting his nephew from London. You notice the colonel observing from his office window, and while his face remains professionally neutral, you'd bet money he's wondering why his carefully organized railway station has been invaded by what looks like a mobile tea party. To his credit, he doesn't intervene middle-class ladies spending time at the station, cause no operational problems, and occasionally purchase refreshments, which makes Mrs. Patterson happy, which makes everyone's life easier. Mrs. Patterson, speaking of whom, has emerged from the refreshment room like a shark sensing blood in the water. Ladies, might I interest you in some tea, fresh this morning, and I've just received a lovely batch of seed cake from a very reputable baker. The definition of reputable is doing heavy lifting in that sentence, but several of the women migrate toward the refreshment room because railway visiting apparently builds up quite a thirst. You watch them file inside, commenting on the cleanliness of the establishment. Annie's earlier scrubbing wasn't entirely wasted, and the quality of the appointments, which mainly consist of wooden tables and chairs that aren't actively collapsing. Through the refreshment room window, you can see them settling in, ordering tea and cake, and continuing their conversations with renewed energy. This is, you realize, probably the highlight of their week, a few hours of social interaction outside their own homes, dressed in their best clothes, engaging with peers in a way that domestic life doesn't really facilitate. A train whistle sounds in the distance. The 11:47 service from Reading is approaching, and the platform is about to get much more crowded. The ladies barely react. They've timed their visit to coincide with the arrival, because watching passengers disembark provides entertainment and occasional social intelligence about who's traveling where and with whom. The locomotive appears, steam billowing, and smoothly comes to a halt. Passengers begin disembarking, a mix of commercial travelers, a few families, someone's elderly aunt visiting from the country. The railway visiting ladies observe from their benches and through the refreshment room window, cataloging who arrives, what they're wearing, whether anyone looks scandalous or interesting or worth discussing later. Constance has wandered over to where you're sweeping and asks quietly, "Is this really what I have to look forward to? Spending my mornings at railway stations pretending to care about other people's walking habits?" You consider lying but decide honesty might be kinder. Probably, you admit. She sighs deeply, stares at the departing train with what might be longing, and returns to her mother's side. The platform returns to its temporary state as middle-class social venue, where locomotives and gossip coexist in Victorian harmony. By 12:30, hunger has become an undeniable reality, and you face a choice that Victorian railway travelers know all too well. Skip lunch entirely, consume whatever dubious provisions you brought from home, or brave Mrs. Patterson's refreshment room. The first option sounds increasingly unappealing. The second option doesn't exist because you forgot to pack anything, which leaves you with the third option and the growing certainty that you're about to make a terrible mistake. The refreshment room sits adjacent to the main platform, a brick-and-timber establishment with large windows that allow natural light and provide clear views of incoming customers. Mrs. Patterson runs it under a concession agreement with the railway company. She pays them a percentage of her revenue in exchange for the exclusive right to sell food and beverages to captive audiences who have literally nowhere else to go. It's a business model that removes any incentive to provide quality, and Mrs. Patterson has leaned into this reality with impressive commitment. You push through the door and the smell hits you first. Boiled vegetables, old grease, something that might be mutton or might be an entirely new form of protein that science hasn't classified yet, all mingled with the ever-present coal smoke that infiltrates every corner of railway life. The room is about half full, commercial travelers mostly, men who have learned through bitter experience that hunger trumps standards, plus a few of the railway visiting ladies who apparently possess either stronger constitutions or weaker taste buds than you'd assumed. The menu board, such as it is, offers limited choices scrawled in chalk: meat pie 6D, pork pie 6D, soup of the day 4D, tea 2D, coffee 3D, and mysteriously, special sandwich 5D. You've learned not to ask what makes the sandwich special. Ignorance is survival. Annie appears from the kitchen, looking even more exhausted than this morning, carrying 2 bowls of soup that slosh dangerously as she navigates between tables. She spots you, and something that might be sympathy flickers across her face. "The soup's probably your safest option," she says quietly, which is the closest she can come to open rebellion against her mother's culinary reign. You claim a table near the window, better views, better air circulation, and Annie returns moments later with a bowl of soup that's the color of dishwater and approximately the same temperature as a lukewarm bath. A few vegetables float on the surface like shipwreck survivors clinging to debris. You're fairly certain you see a carrot, possibly a turnip, and something that defies botanical classification. The first spoonful confirms your suspicions. It's not actively poisonous, which by refreshment room standards qualifies as a win. It's underseasoned to the point of being aggressively bland, overboiled to the point where vegetables have surrendered all structural integrity, and served at a temperature that suggests Mrs. Patterson made it sometime last week and has been gradually reheating it ever since. By the 1850s, railway refreshment rooms had achieved a legendary reputation for terrible food. The satirical magazine Punch published countless jokes about inedible pork pies and coffee that tasted like liquid boot polish. Charles Dickens wrote scathing descriptions of refreshment room meals. The poor quality became so notorious that some railway companies eventually took direct control of their station restaurants, though this improved things only marginally. Historians still argue whether the food was genuinely that bad, or if Victorian travelers just enjoyed complaining, though anyone who's actually eaten at a railway refreshment room knows the answer. A businessman at the next table is attacking a meat pie with the resigned determination of someone who's accepted his fate. You watch him saw through the crust, which appears to have the structural properties of roofing tile, and excavate a filling that's mostly gravy and optimism. He takes a bite, chews thoughtfully, then continues eating with the expression of a man who's decided that protest is futile. The railway visiting ladies are sharing a pot of tea, and what Mrs. Patterson claimed was fresh seed cake, though the cake's dryness suggests it was fresh sometime during the previous geological era. They're picking at it politely while continuing their conversation about someone's cousin's scandalous behavior at a church social, apparently undeterred by food that could double as building material. You soldier through your soup, extracting what nutrition you can from the dissolved vegetables, and trying not to think too hard about what meat might have contributed to the stock. The bread that came with it, an extra penny, is dense enough to serve as a paperweight and tastes like the baker forgot that salt exists. Mrs. Patterson herself holds court behind the counter, a formidable woman whose business philosophy seems to be, they'll eat it because what choice do they have? She's currently explaining to a customer that no, she cannot provide butter for his bread because butter costs money and is therefore not included in the standard service. The customer looks like he wants to argue but recognizes the futility. Mrs. Patterson does not negotiate. A quirky railway refreshment room scandal of 1848 involved a passenger who became so enraged by the quality of his meal that he wrote directly to the railway company chairman, including a sample of the offending pork pie sealed in a jar as evidence. The chairman reportedly examined the pie, agreed it was suboptimal, and then did absolutely nothing because the refreshment room was profitable and Victorian capitalism had priorities. You're considering whether to risk the special sandwich when the platform whistle sounds. The 1:15 service is approaching. Suddenly, the refreshment room erupts into motion. Passengers who have been lingering over terrible tea realize they have approximately 90 seconds to finish and catch their trains. Annie sprints between tables collecting coins and providing hasty change. The businessman abandons his half-eaten pie and rushes for the door, probably weighing whether missing lunch or missing his train is the greater tragedy. Mrs. Patterson stands at her post, counting money with the satisfied expression of someone who knows she's won again. The food may be terrible, the prices may be robbery, but the trains keep coming, the passengers keep getting hungry, and the refreshment room continues its profitable existence. You finish your soup, or rather, you reach the point where continuing to eat it serves no nutritional purpose and leave coins on the table for Annie. She collects them with a grateful nod, probably already dreading the next rush. Outside, you breathe deeply, enjoying fresh air that tastes of coal smoke instead of boiled despair. The afternoon freight operations begin at 1:47, announced not by passenger train whistles, but by the deep, labored chuffing of a locomotive hauling what sounds like half the Industrial Revolution. You're back on the platform when it rounds the bend, a massive freight engine pulling a chain of goods wagons, so long you literally cannot see the end of it from your vantage point. This isn't passenger service with its polite schedules and pretense of comfort. This is the railway's real purpose, moving the raw materials and finished products that keep Victorian Britain's economy from collapsing into pre-industrial irrelevance. The locomotive slows, brakes screaming, and comes to a halt with the kind of mechanical groan that suggests it's as tired as you are. Before it's fully stopped, men are already swarming the wagons, a crew of freight handlers, laborers, and navvies who make big Williams Porter team look like they're playing at work. These are men built like brick structures, with shoulders that suggest they could carry loaded wagons if the wheels fell off, and hands that probably register as lethal weapons in 11 counties. The foreman, a man called Black Jack, though his actual name is John Williams and he's not particularly dark-complexioned, so the nickname's origin remains mysterious, climbs onto the first wagon and begins calling out contents while checking his manifest. Coal, 20 tons to the gasworks. Iron bar stock, Birmingham Forge. Timber, various. Machine parts, destination Morton's Mill. You watch the coordinated chaos begin. The coal wagon gets shunted onto a side track where the gasworks cart is already waiting, pulled by two enormous draft horses who look bored by the entire proceedings. A team of 4 men with shovels attacks the coal pile, and within minutes, black dust is filling the air like a localized weather system. They work in rhythm: shovel, lift, throw, repeat, each man moving tons of coal one shovelful at a time, their backs bent, sweat already soaking through their shirts despite the October chill. By the 1850s, Britain was producing over 50 million tons of coal annually, and most of it moved by rail. Coal powered the steam engines, heated the homes, fueled the factories, and generally made Victorian industrial civilization possible. Without railways to move it efficiently, the whole system would have choked on its own success. You're watching economic history being shoveled one load at a time by men who will probably die young from lung disease that Victorian medicine doesn't understand and won't effectively treat. The iron bar stock requires different handling. These are long metal rods, heavy as sin and twice as dangerous, destined for a forge that'll transform them into tools, machine parts, or structural elements for buildings. 6 men work together to unload them, carrying the bars on their shoulders in coordinated steps that look almost like a dance, if dancing involved risking crushed feet and herniated discs. 1 man misses his footing, stumbles, and the other 5 compensate instantly. Years of experience teaching them to work as a single organism with multiple backs. Timber, Black Jack bellows, and another team converges on a wagon stacked with cut lumber from Scotland. The wood smells of pine resin and distant forests, and the planks are so long that moving them requires 4 men minimum, walking in lockstep, navigating around platform obstacles while other workers shout warnings and directions. 1 plank catches on a post, someone curses, someone else laughs. The plank comes free and the procession continues. You notice one of the laborers, a young man, maybe 20, with the kind of wiry build that suggests he's strong but hasn't filled out yet, struggling with a particularly heavy crate. An older worker, gray-haired and moving with the careful precision of someone whose body has started filing complaints, steps in to help. They lift together and you catch the older man's advice. Back straight, lad, lift with your legs. You want to still be walking when you're my age. The advice is solid. The fact that the older man walks with a pronounced limp suggests following it doesn't guarantee success. A quirky railway freight regulation of the 1840s technically required all dangerous goods to be labeled clearly, but enforcement was creative at best. Stories circulated about unmarked barrels of gunpowder, improperly secured acids, and one legendary incident where someone allegedly shipped a live bear labeled as machinery parts. The bear survived. The freight clerk allegedly did not recover psychologically. The machine parts warrant special attention. These are precision-engineered components destined for Morton's mill, and damaging them means explaining to an angry factory owner why his expensive equipment now looks like it lost an argument with gravity. Blackjack personally supervises this unloading, directing placement with the intensity of a field marshal coordinating troop movements. Each crate gets inspected, cross-referenced with the manifest, and carefully loaded onto a dedicated cart. You're helping redirect foot traffic because apparently some passengers think walking through active freight operations is perfectly safe when you hear the shout, "Timber loose," everyone freezes. A massive beam has slipped from its stack and is sliding toward the platform edge, picking up speed, heading directly toward two workers who haven't noticed because they're focused on their own cargo. You don't think you just move, grabbing the nearest man's shoulder and yanking him sideways. Someone else grabs the second worker. The beam crashes onto the platform exactly where they were standing, the impact loud enough to make your ears ring. Blackjack sprints over, faces furious. Who stacked that? The guilty party, a younger laborer who looks like he's just aged 5 years in 5 seconds, raises his hand sheepishly. Blackjack's lecture on proper stacking technique probably violates several decency laws, but his point about checking restraints before walking away is valid and delivered with educational volume. Historians still argue whether Victorian workplace safety culture was genuinely improving during this period, or if workers just got better at not dying in statistically significant numbers. The railway companies kept accident records, mostly because insurance companies demanded it, but accidents covered everything from minor injuries to catastrophic failures, making historical analysis complicated. The freight operation continues. Coal dust settles on every surface. Iron bars clink as they're stacked. Timber slides from wagon to cart with controlled precision. The laborers sweat, curse, joke, and occasionally pause to gulp water from communal buckets that probably violate several hygiene principles that won't be discovered for another 50 years. By 3:15, the freight train is empty, the cargo distributed, and Blackjack is checking off the final manifest items with the satisfaction of a man who's completed another day without catastrophic disaster. The laborers disperse toward the workers' rest area, a shed with benches where they'll sit, drink tea, eat whatever food they brought, and prepare for the next freight arrival. You survey the platform, coal dust everywhere, despite your earlier sweeping efforts. The Industrial Revolution has left its calling card again. By 2:45, the platform undergoes yet another transformation, and this time the change in atmosphere is almost tangible. The freight dust gets attacked with renewed vigor by a suddenly motivated cleaning crew. The colonel emerges from his office in what appears to be an even more pristine version of his uniform. You didn't know that was possible, but apparently he keeps a special jacket for special occasions. Big William and his porters have formed up like an honor guard, and even the sparrows in the rafters seem to have gotten the memo about behaving themselves. The 3 o'clock express is approaching, and everyone knows it. This isn't just another train. This is the train, the daily express service that connects London to the western towns with a level of speed, comfort, and self-importance that makes all other railway services look like they're playing at transportation. The 3 o'clock express runs with military precision, carries passengers who can afford to consider punctuality a personal right rather than a hopeful suggestion, and has been known to make station staff panic if it's even 30 seconds behind schedule. You can feel it before you hear it, a vibration that's somehow different from the earlier trains, smoother, more purposeful. Then comes the sound, not the labored chuffing of freight engines or the everyday rhythm of local services, but something closer to a mechanical purr, if purrs could be produced by several tons of finely tuned steam locomotive traveling at speeds that would have seemed like witchcraft to someone born 50 years ago. At 2:58, Christopher's telegraph begins clicking urgently. The express is 2 minutes out, running exactly on time, because of course it is. The colonel checks his watch against the platform clock one final time, nods in satisfaction, and takes up his position at the exact center of Platform 1, standing so straight he could have a steel rod surgically implanted in his spine. Then you see it, smoke first, but cleaner smoke than usual from coal that's been carefully selected for quality. Then the locomotive itself rounds the bend, and even you, someone who sees trains all day, every day, feel a moment of genuine awe. This engine gleams. Its brass fittings are polished to mirror brightness. Its green paint looks fresh enough to still be wet, and its wheels are so perfectly balanced that they create almost no noise beyond the steady rhythm of metal on rail. This is what happens when railway companies decide that some services deserve the absolute best equipment and maintenance budgets that would make the freight department weep with envy. The locomotive bears the express service markings and the company's coat of arms painted on its side panels, because apparently trains can have heraldry now Victorian Britain at its finest. Behind the engine, the carriages are equally impressive. First-class coaches with their distinctive cream and maroon livery, large windows, and the kind of suspension that actually attempts to make railway travel comfortable rather than a prolonged experiment in skeletal endurance. By the 1850s, express services represented the cutting edge of railway technology. These trains could maintain average speeds of 40-50 miles per hour, including stops, which meant traveling from London to Bristol in under 3 hours, a journey that had taken an entire day by stagecoach just 20 years earlier. The express services weren't just faster, they were statements about progress, engineering achievement, and the transformative power of steam and iron. Historians still argue whether express trains primarily served genuine business needs or just gave wealthy Victorians something to brag about at dinner parties, though both can be true simultaneously. The train glides to a halt with the kind of smooth precision that makes you suspect driver Bennett has been replaced by a supernatural entity devoted to perfect stops. The buffer comes to rest exactly where the platform markings indicate it should, and you hear the colonel exhale a sound of pure relief that his universe remains orderly. The doors open, and passengers emerge with the bearing of people who have paid premium fares and expect premium treatment in return. These aren't your harried commuters or market-day farmers. These are merchants closing deals in multiple cities, lawyers traveling between courts, gentlemen travelers whose purposes are probably leisure but who'd never admit it, and ladies whose traveling costumes probably cost more than you earn in 6 months. Big William and his crew spring into action with unprecedented urgency. First-class luggage requires first-class handling. These trunks don't get dropped or dragged. They get carefully conveyed as if they contain the crown jewels. Which, given some of these passengers' wardrobes, they might. One trunk is so elaborately decorated with brass fittings and leather straps that it looks like it could survive artillery barrage. William and 2 other porters lift it with ceremonial reverence and place it on a trolley padded with canvas to prevent scuffing. A gentleman in a top hat and immaculate traveling coat descends from a carriage, surveys the platform like a general reviewing troops, and nods toward his luggage, 3 matched pieces that probably required their own seat on the train. Careful with those, he instructs Big William, who's been doing this job for a decade and could probably stack luggage blindfolded. William simply nods, says, "Of course, sir," and handles the bags with exactly the level of care he would have used regardless of the instruction. A quirky aspect of Victorian first-class travel was the elaborate ritual of luggage labels, which evolved into miniature status symbols. Passengers collected labels from prestigious hotels and fashionable destinations, deliberately leaving them attached to advertise their worldliness. Competing luggage label collections became a thing among the upper classes, which sounds ridiculous until you remember that humans will turn literally anything into competitive social display. Mrs. Patterson has positioned herself strategically near the refreshment room entrance, though she's notably upgraded her posture and fixed her hair. Even she recognizes that express passengers represent a different commercial opportunity. A few passengers do venture toward her establishment, probably drawn by curiosity about whether railway refreshment rooms are truly as bad as legend suggests. They'll find out soon enough. The colonel is circulating through the crowd, not checking tickets that's beneath his station for this particular service, but simply being present, radiating authority and competence. He assists a confused elderly lady in finding her connecting service, directs a businessman toward the cab stand, and somehow manages to make platform supervision look like a specialized military operation. You're sweeping coal dust that definitely wasn't there 3 minutes ago. It regenerates like a biblical plague when you notice something. Several local townspeople have gathered at the platform edge, not traveling, just watching. The 3 o'clock express has become a daily spectacle, a few minutes of glamour and engineering excellence that breaks up the ordinary rhythm of provincial life. Children point at the gleaming locomotive. Adults comment on passenger fashions. Everyone seems to agree that this is, indeed, quite something. At 3:07, the whistle sounds. Passengers reboard with the unhurried confidence of people whose tickets guarantee their seats won't be given away. The doors close smoothly. First-class carriages have actual door mechanisms rather than the yank and hope system of third class. The locomotive releases steam with what sounds almost like a satisfied sigh. And then it's gone, accelerating smoothly, already thinking about its next stop 20 miles down the line, leaving behind coal smoke, impressed onlookers, and a platform that feels somehow diminished by its absence. The colonel checks his watch, departed at 3:08, 1 minute behind schedule. He makes a note in his book. Somewhere, someone will answer for this delay. The elegance of the 3 o'clock express evaporates quickly, replaced by something louder, messier, and infinitely more human. By 4:30, the platform is filling again, but this time the crowd doesn't arrive in orderly first-class fashion with matching luggage sets and refined manners. They pour in like a tide: factory workers still wearing dust from the mills, shop clerks with ink-stained fingers and exhausted eyes, laborers whose bodies carry the day's physical toll in their shoulders and backs. This is the working-class homeward wave, and it transforms the station from polite commercial space into something closer to controlled chaos with tickets. You recognize faces from the morning commute, except now they look older, more worn, like the 12 hours between departure and return have aged them in dog years. A man who left this morning in a relatively clean shirt returns with it soaked in sweat and streaked with what might be machine oil, or despair. It's hard to tell. A young woman who departed looking alert now moves with the mechanical shuffle of someone running on fumes and the promise of eventually sitting down. The cheap evening trains, officially called workmen's services, but everyone just calls them the workers' trains, run specifically for this demographic. By law, railway companies must provide at least one daily service at parliamentary rates, no more than a penny per mile, third-class accommodation, and timetables that actually allow workers to commute to and from employment. This isn't generosity, it's government mandate from the Railway Regulation Act, forcing companies to serve the laboring classes they'd otherwise happily ignore in favor of profitable express passengers. The 4:47 to Millbrook arrives right on schedule, and you're standing close enough to appreciate just how different this service is from the gleaming express. The locomotive is older, functional rather than beautiful, its paint job more faded hope than polished pride. Behind it, the third-class carriages look like they've been in continuous service since the railway opened, with wooden benches worn smooth by thousands of exhausted backsides, windows that close only optimistically, and a complete absence of anything resembling luxury or even basic comfort. The doors open, or rather, passengers wrestle them open, because third-class door handles have apparently declared war on human fingers, and people pile in with the desperate efficiency of those who know that hesitation means standing for the entire journey. There's no queue, no polite, after-you ceremony. This is survival of the quickest, and those who delay will be riding home pressed against strangers in a space designed for cargo that occasionally happens to be human-shaped. A woman with 3 small children performs what looks like a magic trick, somehow getting all of them through the narrow door, onto seats, and arranged in a configuration that occupies minimal space while keeping them from actively dying. Her efficiency suggests this isn't her first rodeo or her 100th. One child starts crying. She produces bread from her bag with the timing of a stage magician, and silence is restored. The platform is a symphony of working-class sounds: heavy boots on brick, the metallic clank of lunch pails, conversations shouted over the crowd noise, children complaining, mothers shushing, men laughing about something that probably isn't actually funny but becomes so through sheer exhaustion. Someone's dropped their cap. Someone else has lost a child. No, there he is, trying to climb onto the locomotive because children have no survival instincts. A porter redirects the adventurer back to his mortified father. By the 1850s, these parliamentary trains were genuinely revolutionary for working-class mobility. Before cheap railway fares, workers had to live within walking distance of employment, maybe 2 or 3 miles maximum. Now they could live 5, 10, even 15 miles away, opening up housing options and allowing families to escape the worst industrial slums for slightly less terrible housing in railway suburbs. Historians still argue whether this improved quality of life or just created new forms of exploitation by allowing employers to pay lower wages since workers could afford to live farther from expensive urban centers. You help an elderly man with his bundle tools, probably, judging by the weight and the metallic clanking. He nods thanks, too tired for conversation, and climbs aboard a carriage that's already packed to what modern fire marshals would consider criminal capacity. People squeeze together, finding gaps that shouldn't exist, transforming the carriage interior into a human jigsaw puzzle where everyone fits but nobody's comfortable. A quirky railway legend claims that third-class carriages on cold days actually became warmer than first class because body heat from packed passengers created natural heating more effective than the expensive but inefficient steam heating systems in premium carriages. Whether this made third class preferable is a matter of perspective. Warmth is nice, but so is personal space and breathable air. The contrast with this morning's express is almost comical. Those passengers had reserved seats, cushioned benches, and enough room to read a newspaper without elbowing your neighbor. These passengers have wooden planks, standing room only, and will spend the journey with someone's lunch pail pressing into their kidney while trying to avoid making eye contact with the stranger whose face is now 3 inches from theirs. Yet there's a strange camaraderie here that the express lacked. People help each other with bundles. Someone cracks a joke about the sardine situation and everyone laughs. A man offers his seat to a pregnant woman without being asked. Someone starts humming a tune and others join in music hall songs, folk melodies, anything to make the journey pass faster. Big William is directing traffic, his voice carrying over the chaos. Mind the gap, watch your step, move along inside, plenty of room. The plenty of room claim is optimistic at best, but people appreciate the effort. A few workers slip him pennies tips for help with bundles or just general appreciation for making this daily ordeal slightly less nightmarish. The platform is still packed when the 447 pulls away, overcrowded carriages swaying slightly under their human cargo, heading toward the suburban stations where these workers will finally get to go home, eat something that isn't consumed standing up, and collapse into whatever rest they can steal before tomorrow's shift begins again. More trains will come, the 5:15, the 5:47, the 6:20, each one swallowing another wave of exhausted humanity and carrying them toward domestic life and temporary freedom from industrial discipline. You sweep up the debris they've left, a dropped glove, some newspapers, the inevitable coal dust, and prepare for the next surge. As the working class trains thin out and the evening stretches into that peculiar hour between work and dinner, you notice them appearing like urban wildlife emerging at dusk. Children, local kids, ranging from maybe 6 years old to early teens, materializing from the streets surrounding the station with the confident territorial claim of those who have decided this public space belongs to them. They're not traveling. They're not meeting anyone. They're here because railway stations are, apparently, the Victorian equivalent of adventure playgrounds, offering entertainment, mild danger, and the thrilling possibility of annoying adults. The first to arrive is a gang of 4 boys. You recognize them as regulars, sons of shopkeepers and tradesmen who have finished whatever passes for homework in their households and have been released into the wild with instructions to stay out of trouble that everyone knows they'll immediately ignore. They're led by Tommy Fletcher, a 10-year-old with gap teeth and the kind of fearless energy that suggests he'll either become a railway engineer or die attempting something stupid before age 15. "Oi, it's the 5:15 coal freight," Tommy announces to his crew, pointing at the approaching locomotive like he's a tour guide revealing the pyramids. His friends Arthur, James, and a smaller boy everyone calls Pip for reasons you've never learned immediately spring into action, producing small notebooks and pencil stubs from their pockets. They're train spotters, a hobby that's emerged organically among railway-adjacent children across Britain. The game is simple. Identify locomotives by their number plates, record them in notebooks, compare collections with other enthusiasts, and develop entirely too much knowledge about railway equipment for people who can't yet vote or grow beards. By the 1850s, this pastime had become so popular among boys that locomotive manufacturers started receiving letters from children requesting technical specifications, much to the confusion of engineers who'd assumed their audience was limited to railway professionals and occasionally interested investors. The coal freight rumbles past Platform 2, and all 4 boys shout simultaneously, "Number 184, Great Northern, built 1851. They scribble in their notebooks with the intense focus usually reserved for vital national security operations, comparing notes, arguing about whether the locomotive is actually 184 or 148. Tommy insists he can tell the difference from the chimney shape, which seems optimistic. The colonel notices them from his office window, and you see his face arrange itself into the expression of a man who knows he should probably intervene, but also recognizes that chasing children off the platform is like trying to hold back the tide. They'll just come back the moment you turn around. He settles for watching with weary vigilance, ready to intervene if they attempt anything genuinely dangerous. A group of younger children appears next 3 girls and 2 boys, probably 6 or 7 years old, led by a tiny girl with blonde pigtails who seems to have appointed herself expedition commander. They're not interested in locomotive numbers. They're playing a game that appears to involve pretending the platform is a ship, the waiting room is an island, and the coal bins are enemy fortifications that must be conquered through interpretive dance and a lot of shrieking. We must defend the kingdom. The tiny commander announces, her voice carrying across the entire station. "Sarah, for heaven's sake, volume. That's Mrs. Cooper, who's arrived to collect her husband from the next train and has the misfortune of being the pigtailed general's mother." Sarah acknowledges this correction by lowering her voice for approximately 4 seconds before returning to previous volumes, because children are nothing if not consistent. Tommy's gang has moved on from train spotting to a new entertainment, counting the sparrows in the station roof and placing bets on which one will defecate first. This is apparently a well-established game with rules, point systems, and ongoing disputes about whether that one near the eastern support beam counts or if it's too far to qualify. You briefly consider intervening, but decide you're not paid enough to referee birdwatching gambling. A quirky railway station practice that emerged in the 1850s involved station staff, occasionally, hiring local children to run errands delivering messages, fetching tools, or warning approaching passengers about platform obstacles, paying them in pennies or railway surplus items. This created an informal economy where children who hung around stations often enough could earn pocket money while learning railway operations, though whether this represented child labor exploitation or entrepreneurial opportunity depends significantly on your perspective and possibly your economic philosophy. Two teenage boys have discovered that the luggage scales make excellent seats and are now lounging there, discussing something intensely important, probably girls, or cricket, or whether the butcher's new apprentice can actually throw a punch or just talks a good game. The colonel emerges from his office specifically to chase them off the scales, and they relocate with minimal protest to a bench, where they continue their conversation without missing a beat. Sarah's pirate ship game has evolved into something involving the platform edge, and you quickly intervene before her maritime adventures end with someone falling onto the tracks. "Come on, Captain," you say, redirecting her inland. "Enemy ships don't approach from that direction. They do if they're sneaky enemy ships," Sarah explains with impeccable logic. You can't argue with that, so you suggest the enemy might be attacking from the waiting room instead, which successfully redirects her attention away from the potentially fatal drop. Mrs. Cooper mouths, "Thank you," from across the platform. Tommy's gang has climbed onto a stack of crates near the freight area, definitely against regulations, and are using them as a vantage point to observe the signal box, where young Arthur is pulling levers with the mechanical precision of someone who doesn't want to cause a train crash. The boys are attempting to decode the signal system, creating elaborate theories about what each lever does, most of which are completely wrong but demonstrate impressive imagination. That one controls the London line. Tommy declares with absolute confidence, "That one's for emergencies." James counters, "You're both idiots. It's obviously for the mail trains." Pip contributes, which starts an argument that you suspect will outlast the evening. Historians still argue whether allowing children to treat railway stations as playgrounds represented dangerous negligence or just Victorian childhood reality, where safety was more suggestion than requirement, and children learned spatial awareness through a Darwinian process of not dying. Fatalities were rare enough to avoid serious intervention, but common enough that everyone knew at least one cautionary tale about a child who'd gotten too adventurous around moving trains. The 5:47 approaches, and the children's games pause momentarily. Watching trains arrive never gets old, apparently before resuming with renewed energy. Tommy's gang records another locomotive number. Sarah's pirates capture the enemy's stronghold, actually just the ladies' waiting room, which Mrs. Patterson will definitely have opinions about. The teenage boys continue their philosophical debate about punch-throwing competence. The colonel stands at his office window, watching this chaos, probably wondering if other station masters deal with this or if he's been specifically cursed. But he doesn't chase them away. The platform belongs to everyone, even children with terrible ideas about naval warfare. As the clock edges past 6, a different kind of commerce emerges on the platform, scrappier, more desperate, and conducted almost entirely by people who can't legally buy alcohol or vote, but have nevertheless mastered the dark arts of competitive sales. The evening vendors arrive in waves, newsboys clutching the late editions, flower girls with wilting bouquets purchased wholesale that morning, shoeshine boys carrying wooden boxes and faint hope, and an entire ecosystem of child entrepreneurs who have learned that tired commuters have loose change and weakened resistance to persistent sales tactics. Danny the newsboy, whom you saw this morning, returns with evening editions, the same leather satchel, the same aggressive energy, but now he's facing competition. Two other newsboys have appeared, positioning themselves at strategic points along the platform like generals claiming territory. The unspoken rules of vendor hierarchy apparently give Danny seniority on Platform 1, but Platform 2 is disputed ground, and the waiting room entrance is currently being contested by a younger boy, maybe 9 years old, who's either brave or hasn't learned about territorial consequences yet. Evening Standard. Read about Parliament's latest disaster. Danny bellows, his voice already hoarse from a day of shouting. He's not editorializing. Parliament's latest disaster is actually the headline because Victorian journalism understood that outrage sells newspapers better than balanced reporting. The younger competitor fires back. Chronicle, full report on the railway accident. You hadn't heard about a railway accident, but apparently sensationalism isn't bound by factual constraints. Several commuters immediately fork over their pennies, because nothing attracts attention like potential transportation disasters when you're standing on a train platform. By the 1850s, newspaper boys had become a ubiquitous feature of railway stations, selling evening editions to commuters who wanted to read during their journey or catch up on news they'd missed while working 12-hour shifts. The job paid roughly threepence to sixpence daily, depending on sales, which wasn't enough to live on but could supplement family income or keep a homeless child fed. The work was legal, unlike some child labor that reformers were beginning to question, though the hours were brutal and the competition could turn genuinely vicious. A flower girl appears near the platform entrance, and you recognize her as Maggie, a rail-thin 12-year-old who's been working this station for at least 2 years. Her basket contains roses that were probably beautiful this morning, but have now achieved that sad, drooping quality that flowers get when they've been carried around in questionable water for 10 hours. She's wearing a shawl that's more holes than fabric and a dress that's been patched so many times it's basically a patchwork construction held together by optimism. Flowers for your sweetheart. Maggie calls out, targeting men in business attire who might be convinced that purchasing wilting roses will somehow compensate for working late and missing dinner. Only a penny, make the missus smile. Her sales technique combines guilt, romance, and the implicit threat that not buying flowers suggests you don't love your wife enough. It's surprisingly effective. A clerk in a rumpled suit stops, examines the roses with the critical eye of someone who knows these are past their prime, then buys 3 anyway because Maggie's already started wrapping them in newspaper and thanking him profusely. A shoeshine boy, you don't know his name, but he's been around for weeks, has set up his wooden box near a bench and is already working on a customer's boots. The man sits reading his newly purchased newspaper while the boy attacks his footwear with brush and polish, working with the focused intensity of someone who knows that tips depend on results. The boots were probably polished this morning, but 12 hours of industrial Britain has left them coated in coal dust, mud, and the general grime that settles on everything in a railway town. A quirky aspect of Victorian shoeshine culture was the elaborate hierarchy and territorial disputes among bootblacks, particularly at major stations. Older boys claimed prime locations, newcomers got relegated to less profitable spots, and anyone who violated these unwritten rules risked having their polish accidentally stolen or their brushes mysteriously damaged. The system was feudal capitalism in miniature, complete with occasional violence and a complete absence of adult supervision. The evening vendors don't just compete with each other, they're competing against time. Every passing minute means fewer commuters with money to spend. The early train passengers have already left, taking their pennies with them. The remaining commuters are calculating whether they need that newspaper badly enough, whether those flowers will actually make their wives happy or just prompt questions about what they're apologizing for, whether clean boots are worth the penny when there's bread to buy. Tommy's gang of train-spotting boys has abandoned locomotives in favor of observing vendor dynamics, which apparently offers superior entertainment. They're keeping score not of sales, but of rejection techniques. That bloke just pretended he didn't hear her, James notes with delight as a businessman walks past Maggie while staring intently at the platform clock as if it contains the secrets of the universe. Watch this one, Tommy predicts, pointing at a tired-looking man approaching Danny's position. He'll buy the paper but negotiate the price. Can't negotiate newspaper prices, you muppet, Pip responds. They're fixed. Watch, Tommy insists. The man does indeed try to negotiate, offering a halfpenny for a penny paper, which Danny rejects with language that makes Mrs. Cooper cover Sarah's ears from across the platform. The man ultimately pays full price, muttering about inflation and the decline of Christian values. Another flower girl appears competition for Maggie, and you can see the tension immediately. The newcomer is older, maybe 15, with better flowers and a more aggressive sales pitch. She positions herself directly in the flow of foot traffic, forcing commuters to actively avoid her, which many find easier to resolve by just buying a flower and escaping. Maggie responds by lowering her prices to a halfpenny and targeting different demographics: older gentlemen who might appreciate the cheaper option, working-class men who want flowers but can't afford the competition's rates. The economics of evening vendor life play out in real time, race to the bottom on pricing while hoping volume compensates for reduced margins. The shoeshine boy finishes his customer's boots and receives tuppence a penny for the shine, a penny tip for good work. He pockets the coins with visible relief and immediately starts scanning for the next customer, because standing idle means lost income. By 6:45, the platform is thinning. The peak commuter rush has passed, and the vendors begin their retreat. Danny counts his remaining papers, 7 unsold, which means he'll return them to the distributor for a partial refund, but still take a loss on the day. Maggie's basket is nearly empty, which should be good news, except you notice she's eating one of the leftover roses, which suggests dinner isn't guaranteed tonight. The flower girl's competitor has already left, apparently satisfied with her sales. The shoeshine boy packs his equipment, carefully wrapping brushes and polished tins, protecting the tools that represent his entire business model. He counts his earnings. You can't see the total, but his expression suggests it's enough for tonight's meal and maybe a little extra. The vendors disappear into the evening streets, heading toward homes or lodgings or whatever shelter they've arranged, carrying the day's pennies and tomorrow's uncertainty. The platform is suddenly quieter, the commercial frenzy concluded, leaving only the regular station staff and the eternal coal dust. By 7 o'clock, the sky has surrendered to darkness, and the station transforms again. Gas lamps hiss to full brightness, casting pools of yellow light across the platforms that make the shadows between them seem even darker. The temperature has dropped enough that your breath becomes visible, and the coal smoke from idling locomotives creates a low fog that clings to the ground like it's too tired to rise. This is the transition hour, when the daytime rhythm gives way to something stranger and quieter, the realm of night operations, skeleton crews, and the particularly dedicated postal workers who have arrived to prepare the night mail. You spot them gathering near Platform 2, a team of 6 postal clerks led by Mr. Harrison, the senior mail supervisor, a man whose entire personality seems constructed from regulations, punctuality, and a deep suspicion of anything that isn't precisely labeled. They're dressed in the Royal Mail uniform, dark coats with official insignia, caps that mark them as government employees, and the weary expressions of people about to spend the next 8 hours in a moving railway carriage sorting mail by lantern light while being jostled at 40 miles per hour. Right then, Harrison announces, consulting a clipboard that probably contains more information than the Library of Alexandria. TPO arrives in 20 minutes. Mail bags should already be staged. Let's verify. The TPO Traveling Post Office is one of Victorian Britain's stranger innovations, a specially designed railway carriage that's essentially a mobile sorting office, allowing postal workers to process mail while in transit rather than waiting until arrival at destination stations. It's efficient, it's ingenious, and it's reportedly absolute hell to work in when the track gets rough and you're trying to sort letters while being thrown sideways into filing cabinets. You follow the postal crew to the staging area, where canvas mail sacks are stacked like sandbags defending against an epistolary invasion. Each sack is labeled with its origin point and general destination: London Northern Counties, Manchester Local Delivery, Birmingham Onward Connection, and they're stuffed to bursting with the day's correspondence, business documents, newspapers, and probably a few items that shouldn't be sent via post, but people try anyway. Mr. Sutton from this morning's mail chaos has reappeared, looking even more harassed than earlier, which you didn't think was possible. 3 bags from the afternoon collection, he reports, pointing to the newest additions. 2 manifests with discrepancies that I've noted but can't resolve without divine intervention, and 1 bag that smells suspicious but isn't technically leaking. Delightful, Harrison responds in a tone suggesting he finds it anything but load them with the others. Mark the suspicious one for early processing. By the 1850s, the traveling post office system had revolutionized mail delivery speed. Before TPOs, mail could only be sorted at stationary offices, creating delays every time it needed to be transferred between services. Now postal workers could sort during the journey itself, meaning letters posted in London at 6 p.m. could theoretically arrive in Edinburgh by the following morning, assuming the train didn't derail and the postal clerks didn't go insane from motion sickness. Historians still argue whether the efficiency gains justified the working conditions, though postal workers themselves probably had strong opinions that didn't make it into official records. The TPO carriage arrives, coupled to the 7:30 service that will run overnight to Newcastle with stops at every significant station between here and the Scottish border. It's immediately recognizable longer than standard carriages, with specially reinforced sides and small windows set high up to prevent mail theft, apparently a genuine concern in Victorian England, where people would do almost anything for a shot at intercepting someone else's correspondence. The side door slides open, revealing the interior, a narrow workspace lined with sorting racks, wooden pigeonholes labeled with destination codes, a small desk bolted to the floor, oil lamps hanging from ceiling mounts because sorting in darkness seems inefficient, and approximately zero space for human comfort. This is a workplace designed by engineers who prioritized mail over the people processing it, which is very on-brand for Victorian industrial design. Beautiful, isn't she? One of the younger postal clerks says with what sounds like genuine affection, which suggests either dedication to public service or Stockholm Syndrome with railway infrastructure. The crew begins loading mail bags through the side door, passing them up in a human chain with practiced efficiency. Each bag gets cross-referenced against the manifest, checked for secure closure, and stacked in the designated storage area within the carriage. The process has the rhythm of a well-rehearsed performance lift. Pass, verify, stack, repeat, accompanied by the kind of casual conversation that happens when people have done this exact task hundreds of times. Did you hear Jenkins is transferring to the Brighton route? One clerk mentions while hefting a particularly heavy bag. Lucky bastard, another responds. Coastal air, shorter runs, probably half the volume. Also half the pay supplement, Harrison interjects, because apparently he hears everything. Night mail pays extra for a reason, gentlemen. That reason being that sorting mail in a moving carriage at night while being shaken like a cocktail by Victorian track conditions is roughly as pleasant as voluntary tooth extraction, but nobody says that part out loud. A quirky detail of TPO work was the specialized vocabulary that developed among postal clerks, terms like throw-off, mail bags tossed from moving trains at specific points, pick-up mail bags snatched by mechanical arms while the train was in motion, which sounds terrifying and was, and dead letter mail that couldn't be delivered, though whether the term referred to the letter's status or the clerk's emotional state after 12 hours in the TPO remains unclear. Inside the carriage, the postal clerks are setting up their workspace, lighting lamps, arranging sorting tools, double-checking that the pigeonhole labels are current, and generally preparing for a night of turning chaos into alphabetized order while Newcastle gets progressively closer. One clerk produces a sandwich from his coat pocket dinner, apparently, and begins eating while simultaneously organizing forms, which suggests either impressive multitasking or complete resignation to the working conditions. You help load the final bags, and Harrison performs one last inspection, walking the length of the platform, checking closures, verifying manifests, and probably praying to whatever deity oversees postal operations that tonight's journey will be mercifully uneventful. The gas lamps flicker slightly, someone's adjusting flow somewhere, and shadows dance across the TPO's wooden sides. At 7:26, Harrison consults his pocket watch, nods to his crew, and boards the TPO. The door slides shut, and through the high windows you can see the lantern light inside as the postal clerks settle into position. The 7:30 service whistles its departure warning, and with a lurch and a hiss, the train begins moving, carrying mail and exhausted government employees into the darkness. The platform feels emptier without them. The night shift has begun. The departure of the night mail creates a strange silence, broken only by the distant hiss of locomotives in the shed and the occasional clang from the workshop where night maintenance crews are beginning their shift. But the quiet doesn't last long. By 7:45, a different kind of passenger begins trickling onto the platform: the stragglers, the late workers, the people who missed earlier trains or whose obligations kept them in town past the conventional commuter hours. They arrive alone or in pairs, moving with the particular exhaustion of people whose day has stretched beyond reasonable limits. You recognize a few faces: the solicitor's clerk who's probably been copying documents by gaslight for the past 3 hours, the shopkeeper who stayed late for inventory, a domestic servant whose employer apparently believes that reasonable working hours is a flexible concept. These aren't the morning's fresh-faced commuters or the afternoon's tired but functional workers. These are the remnants, running on fumes and the promise that home exists somewhere down the line. The 8:15 to Ashford represents the last viable suburban service for anyone living within 10 miles. After this, the trains get sparse freight mostly, with occasional passenger services for those traveling longer distances. Miss the 8:15, and you're looking at either a very long walk home or an uncomfortable night on a station bench explaining to the colonel why you're loitering. The train arrives looking as tired as its prospective passengers, an older locomotive that's been in service all day, pulling carriages that have accumulated the day's worth of grime, dropped newspapers, and mysterious stains that probably have stories you don't want to hear. Driver Bennett, yes, still working, apparently immune to fatigue or human limitations, brings it to a halt with less precision than this morning's arrivals. But honestly, everyone's too exhausted to care about 6-inch variations in stopping position. The doors open, and the stragglers board with none of the morning's urgency. There's no shoving, no competition for seats, because the carriage is maybe a third full, and everyone can sit wherever they please. The solicitor's clerk claims a corner seat and immediately closes his eyes. The shopkeeper spreads his account books across a bench, apparently planning to work during the journey because rest is for people without business pressures. The domestic servant simply sits, staring at nothing, her face carrying the particular blankness of someone whose thoughts have shut down until further notice. A young couple appears at the last moment, practically running onto the platform, laughing about nearly missing the train. They're well-dressed enough to suggest they've been at some evening entertainment theater maybe, or dinner with friends, and they board with the cheerful energy of people whose lateness stems from enjoyment rather than obligation. Their laughter sounds strange against the evening's general exhaustion, like hearing birdsong in a coal mine. By the 1850s, evening railway services had begun enabling a new kind of social life for the middle classes. You could attend events in town and still return home the same night, rather than requiring overnight accommodation. This expanded the social radius of provincial towns, allowing people to maintain urban cultural connections while living in suburban or semi-rural settings. Historians still argue whether this improved quality of life or just extended the working day by making it harder to use distance as an excuse for leaving social obligations early. Big William appears to help an elderly gentleman with his luggage, a single small bag, but the man moves like stairs, are a personal enemy, and lifting things might actually kill him. William guides him to a first-class carriage with unexpected gentleness, helping him settle into a seat near the window, making sure he's comfortable before accepting the tuppence tip with a nod. "Last train's always the strangest," William comments, returning to where you're standing. You get the desperate ones, the romantic ones, and the ones who have just given up entirely. He's not wrong. A woman boards carrying what appears to be an entire bakery's worth of bread, probably purchased at end-of-day discount prices, and struggles to arrange the loaves without crushing them. A man in paint-splattered clothes climbs aboard, suggesting he's been working on some artistic or construction project that ran catastrophically late. Two teenage boys board looking guilty about something, probably out past curfew, and hoping their parents are either asleep or too tired to deliver lectures. Platform is emptying in real time. The stragglers have boarded, the young couple has found seats, and the locomotive is building steam for departure. The colonel emerges from his office for one final inspection, checking that all doors are closed, all passengers are aboard, and the universe remains properly ordered. He exchanges words with driver Bennett, probably something about tomorrow's schedule, because the colonel's concept of evening relaxation apparently involves planning the next day's operations. The departure whistle sounds at 8:17, 2 minutes late, which will definitely be noted in the colonel's book of cosmic grievances. The train pulls away slowly, gathering speed, its lights receding into the darkness like a mechanical creature returning to its lair. You watch the red tail lamp disappear around the bend, and suddenly the platform feels profoundly empty. The gas lamps continue burning, creating pools of yellow light that emphasize rather than diminish the surrounding darkness. A few people remain, someone waiting for the 9:20 long-distance service, a couple saying extended goodbyes near the waiting room, a man who might be asleep on a bench or might be dead, though he's snoring so probably alive. The daytime energy has completely drained away, leaving something quieter, stranger, more liminal. You lean on your broom and realize you can hear things that were inaudible earlier. The wind moving through the iron roof supports, my scurrying somewhere in the walls, the distant bark of a dog in town, your own breathing. The station has transformed from bustling commercial hub to something closer to a cathedral at midnight, still purposeful, still functioning, but operating in a different key entirely. Annie emerges from the refreshment room, locking the door behind her. Mrs. Patterson has apparently gone home, leaving her daughter to close up. She looks at the empty platform, then at you, and manages a tired smile. "Survived another day," she says, which seems like an appropriate summary. The 8:15's lights have completely vanished now, carrying the last suburban passengers toward lamplight and dinner and whatever domestic life awaits them. The platform settles into evening stillness, broken only by the footsteps of night crews beginning their vigil. By 9 o'clock, the daytime staff has mostly dispersed, heading home to their own lives and leaving the station in the hands of a different breed entirely, the night crew. These are men who have chosen or been assigned to work the hours when normal people sleep, maintaining the railway's operations through darkness in a vigil that most passengers never see or consider. They arrive quietly, without the morning's urgency, moving with the calm purposefulness of people who know that panic accomplishes nothing when you're the only one available to fix problems. You're technically off duty, your shift ended at 8, but you've stayed to help with the transition, partly from dedication, and partly because going home to a cold room doesn't sound appealing yet. The colonel has finally left, handing operational authority to Mr. Graves, the night supervisor, a lean man in his 50s whose face carries the weathered look of someone who's seen every possible railway disaster and lived to file reports about them. "Quiet evening so far," Graves observes, which everyone knows is tempting fate. Railway workers are superstitious about declaring things quiet or uneventful, believing it summons chaos through some perverse cosmic law. But Graves has been doing this for 20 years, and apparently no longer fears supernatural retribution. The night signal operator arrives, not young Arthur, but an older man named Walsh, who will occupy the signal box from 9 p.m. until 6 a.m., pulling levers in solitude while maintaining vigilance that prevents trains from occupying the same section of track simultaneously. He carries a lunch pail, a thermos of what you suspect is more whiskey than tea, and a book, probably some sensational novel about murders or adventures, something to occupy his mind during the long stretches when nothing happens. Evening, Walsh, Graves greets him. Expecting the 11:40 freight from Birmingham, the 2:15 mail service northbound, and possibly a coal delivery around 4 if they're running on schedule, which they won't be. Walsh nods, commits this to memory, and climbs the signal box stairs to begin his lonely watch. Through the window, you can see him lighting the oil lamp, settling into his chair, and opening his book to a marked page. He'll spend the night pulling levers when required, watching for signals, and reading about fictional problems that probably seem more interesting than real ones. The night fireman is already at work in the engine shed. You can see the orange glow from here. Hear the rhythmic clang of coal being shoveled. His job is to keep the standby locomotives warm and ready, maintaining steam pressure at levels that allow quick deployment if needed. It's hot, exhausting work that continues regardless of whether trains are actually running, because letting boilers go cold means hours of reheating when urgency strikes. By the 1850s, railway companies had learned through expensive mistakes that 24-hour operations required dedicated night crews. Early railways tried having daytime staff simply work longer hours, which resulted in exhausted workers making catastrophic error signals missed, switches thrown incorrectly, maintenance overlooked. The introduction of proper night shifts reduced accidents significantly, though it created a permanent class of railway workers who existed in temporal opposition to normal society, sleeping when others worked, working when others slept. 2 trackmen arrive for the night patrol brothers named Samuel and Robert, who walk the rails in darkness checking for problems that might cause morning disasters. They carry lanterns, tools, and the calm resignation of people whose job involves trudging through cold darkness looking for subtle defects in iron and wood. Their shift will involve walking roughly 15 miles of track, examining every joint, every sleeper, every potential failure point, and reporting anything suspicious. Section 4 still needs attention, Graves tells them, consulting his logbook. Mac noted some loose ballast this afternoon. Check it thoroughly. Samuel nods, and the brothers disappear into the darkness beyond the platform, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies as they begin their methodical patrol. You've done night track inspection before. It's meditative in a strange way, just you and the rails and the darkness, with occasional moments of terror when you hear a train approaching and need to clear the track quickly. A junior clerk arrives to staff the ticket office overnight, not for heavy sales, but to handle any travelers arriving on late services or early morning departures. He's maybe 19, still has the enthusiasm of someone who thinks night work sounds adventurous rather than soul-crushing, and he'll spend the next 8 hours reading, dozing, and occasionally selling a ticket to someone whose travel plans defy normal human schedules. The night porter, just one, compared to the daytime team of 6, takes up position near platform 1. His name is George, and he's built like he could carry a piano upstairs without assistance. His job is to handle any luggage needs, assist disabled passengers, and generally serve as the physical presence that prevents the station from becoming a free-for-all for vagrants, criminals, or anyone else who thinks an unguarded railway station sounds inviting. A quirky aspect of Victorian night railway work was the development of a strange camaraderie among night crews across different stations. Telegraph operators would exchange jokes and gossip during quiet hours. Signal operators would send non-official messages about weather conditions or interesting occurrences, and night workers developed their own social network that existed entirely in darkness and electromagnetic pulses. The gas lamps hiss quietly, maintaining their vigil. The station clock ticks toward 10. Graves settles into the supervisor's office with paperwork and coffee that could probably strip paint. Walsh pulls a lever in the signal box as some distant service requires track clearance. The night fireman shovels coal in his private inferno. The trackmen walk the rails somewhere in the darkness, their lanterns invisible from here. You finally decide to head home, leaving the station in the hands of those who will guard it through the night. As you walk toward the exit, you glance back at the platforms empty now, lit by gas lamps that create more shadow than light, waiting patiently for tomorrow's chaos to begin again. The railway never sleeps, it just changes who's watching. You return to the station near midnight partly because you forgot your cap in the equipment shed, partly because sleep isn't coming easily tonight, and partly because there's something oddly compelling about the station at this hour, when the day's frenetic energy has completely drained away and the place exists in a state of pure potential, waiting for tomorrow's chaos to begin again. The platform is deserted. The last passenger service departed hours ago, and the freight trains that occasionally rumble through at this hour are running late or rerouted or simply operating on schedules known only to the railway gods and possibly not even them. The gas lamps have been dimmed to conserve fuel, leaving just enough light to navigate without walking into posts or falling onto tracks, but not enough to dispel the shadows that claim most of the platform. The air is cold now, properly cold, the kind that makes your breath visible and reminds you that October is preparing to surrender to November. The coal smoke that dominated the daytime atmosphere has mostly dispersed, replaced by cleaner night air carrying scents from the town, bread baking in early preparation for morning sales, coal fires in homes burning low through the night, the vague metallic smell that all industrial towns seem to produce regardless of their specific industries. You stand near the center of Platform 1, where the colonel performs his daily clock synchronization ritual, and look up. The station's iron roof frames a rectangle of sky, and through the glass panels, those that aren't obscured by soot, you can actually see stars. Not many, because Victorian Britain's coal-burning civilization creates enough atmospheric haze to dim celestial displays, but enough. A few bright points of light that have been shining since before the railway existed, before the town existed, before anyone thought iron and steam could revolutionize human civilization. It's strange to think that these same stars witnessed the coaching inns that once dominated this location, saw the first railway surveyors arrive with their instruments and ambitious plans, watched the station rise from nothing, and will continue burning long after the railway itself is forgotten. Perspective is unsettling when you allow yourself to consider it. The engine shed is still active. You can hear the night fireman's rhythmic work, see the glow from the furnace doors. But it's distant, muted, like listening to someone else's party from several streets away. The signal box shows a single lamp burning where Walsh sits reading his novel, or possibly dozing. Night signal work involves long periods of absolutely nothing happening, punctuated by brief moments of critical importance. A quirky railway legend claims that night workers occasionally see ghosts of accident victims on the track's spectral passengers still waiting for trains that crashed decades ago, or railway workers who died in service and haven't realized they're no longer required to report for shifts. Whether these stories reflect genuine supernatural phenomena or just sleep-deprived workers processing trauma through folklore remains an open question, though you've worked enough night shifts to understand how darkness and solitude can conjure shapes from nothing. Steam drifts across the platform from somewhere, probably the standby locomotive in the shed, releasing pressure, breathing gently in its temporary rest. It moves like fog, silvery in the dim lamplight, creating temporary sculptures that dissolve even as you watch them. For a moment, the platform looks like something from a dream or a painting, all soft edges and mysterious shadows, bearing no resemblance to the chaotic commercial space of daylight hours. You retrieve your forgotten cap from the equipment shed, but you don't leave immediately. There's something peaceful about standing here in the silence, being the only conscious human for probably 100 yards in any direction, experiencing the station as a place rather than a function. During the day, the platforms are just infrastructure surfaces for standing, waiting, moving. At midnight, there's something else: architecture, geometry, the physical manifestation of human ambition to connect distant places through iron determination. The town beyond the station is mostly asleep. A few windows show lamplight, someone working late, someone unable to sleep, someone keeping vigil over illness or newborns or private worries. But most buildings are dark, their occupants surrendered to rest, trusting that tomorrow will arrive on schedule and bring with it the trains, the commerce, the endless industrial rhythm that defines their lives. By the 1850s, railway towns had developed this strange dual existence: frenetic activity during operating hours, almost eerie stillness during the gaps between services. The railway imposed its rhythm on everything: wake when trains run, work when passengers arrive, rest when the platform's empty. Your great-grandfather lived by sun and seasons. You live by timetables and whistles. A distant sound, Samuel and Robert, the Trackman brothers, somewhere in the darkness conducting their methodical inspection. You can't see them, but you hear the faint clink of tools, a murmured conversation carried on night air. They'll walk until dawn, checking, testing, ensuring that tomorrow's trains don't encounter problems that midnight could have prevented. The platform clock reads 12:17. Technically tomorrow already, though it doesn't feel like it yet. Tomorrow doesn't truly begin until the colonel arrives at 4:47 a.m., until Tom the fireman stokes the first boiler, until the whistle sounds and the station awakens from its brief, restless sleep. You stand there a moment longer, breathing cold air, watching steam drift skyward toward stars, listening to the night fireman's distant labors and the silence between them. Tomorrow, this platform will host hundreds of people rushing, waiting, buying, selling, arriving, departing, living their lives in intersection with iron rails and steam power. But right now, it's just you, the darkness, the waiting locomotives, and the patient station holding its breath between yesterday and tomorrow. You pull your cap on, turn toward home, and leave the midnight platform to its vigil. Behind you, the gas lamps continue burning, the night crew continues working, and the railway continues its endless conversation with time and distance, and the stubborn human insistence that geography can be conquered through engineering and persistence. The empty platform waits. Tomorrow's trains are already inevitable, already scheduled, already approaching through the hours of darkness. The station knows they'll arrive. It always does. It's been designed for exactly this eternal cycle: chaos, rest, chaos again, without end. You walk into the dark streets, towards sleep, knowing you'll return before sunrise to begin again. The railway demands it. The timetable requires it. And somewhere in the back of your mind, beneath the exhaustion and the cold dust and the aching feet, you wouldn't have it any other way. The rhythm of the railway town continues, night bleeding into morning, the platform transitioning from silent vigil to awakening industry. The first hints of dawn appear, barely perceptible, just the faintest lightening of the eastern sky. The stars begin to fade, yielding to the coming day. The night fireman completes his shift, the boilers ready, the steam building. Walsh stretches in his signal box, his book closed, his attention returning to the levers and the approaching schedule. Samuel and Robert finish their track patrol, their lanterns dimming as natural light begins its slow return. The colonel will arrive soon, pocket watch in hand, ready to ensure the universe remains properly ordered. Tom will shovel coal, Driver Bennett will circle his locomotive with oil can and careful attention, Big William and his crew will take their positions. The platform will fill again with passengers, vendors, mail sacks, and the endless industrial ballet that defines life in a railway town. But in this quiet moment between night and day, the station rests. The platforms breathe. The iron rails wait patiently for the weight of locomotives and the motion of wheels. The gas lamps burn lower, knowing their shift is ending, that daylight will reclaim the station and restore its purpose. And you, standing somewhere between exhaustion and peace, understand that you're part of something larger: a system, a rhythm, a revolution in iron and steam that's rewriting how humans experience distance and time. You're a small piece, certainly, just someone who sweeps platforms and helps with luggage and witnesses the daily miracle of trains arriving and departing with clockwork precision. But small pieces matter. The railway functions because thousands of small pieces perform their duties faithfully, repeatedly, day after day. The colonel's obsessive timekeeping, Tom's methodical coal shoveling, Big William's patient luggage handling, Christopher's tireless telegraph operations, the night crew's solitary vigil, each piece essential, each worker contributing to the larger mechanism that keeps Victorian Britain connected and moving. Tomorrow no, today now will bring the same challenges, the same chaos, the same exhausted commuters and demanding passengers and terrible refreshment room food. The market train will arrive with its agricultural pandemonium. The 3 o'clock express will glide through with mechanical perfection. The working-class trains will overflow with humanity heading home. The children will treat the platform as their playground. The vendors will compete for pennies. The night crew will take over when darkness falls. And you'll be there, broom in hand, sweeping coal dust that regenerates faster than you can remove it, helping maintain the fragile order that prevents transportation infrastructure from descending into chaos. It's not glamorous. It's not particularly well paid. But it's yours, your role in the great industrial transformation, your contribution to the iron roads that are reshaping Britain from an agricultural nation into something new, something unprecedented, something that your grandchildren will take for granted, but which seems almost miraculous to anyone who remembers the coaching in days. The sky lightens further. The birds in the rafters begin their morning arguments. The first sounds of the waking town drift across the empty platforms. The railway station prepares to wake, to transform from peaceful midnight cathedral back into bustling commercial hub. The cycle continues, eternal and inevitable, driven by timetables and steam and human persistence. And somewhere in the engine shed, the first whistle sounds soft, almost tentative, a mechanical clearing of the throat before the day's full-throated roar begins. The night surrenders. The platforms stir. The railway awakens, ready to carry another day's worth of passengers, freight, mail, and dreams across the iron landscape of industrial Britain. Sweet dreams, traveler. Tomorrow's trains are already approaching.